This was supposed to be history, the perfect photo op. John Young and Bob Crippen, commander and pilot of the first space shuttle flight, posing for pictures 30 years later with the last crew of the last shuttle.
Ready, 1, 2.
Not that every shuttle crew isn't hand-picked or special, but this crew, these 6, had been singled out for the upcoming Discovery flight. Alvin Drew was in Russia when he got the word his boss in Houston wanted to talk.
Went over the long and sundry list of things I could be in trouble for that I was not going to admit to.
Nicole Stott and Michael Barrett were 250 miles up on the space station when they were asked. Tim Coper was just back from a station mission. Pilot Eric Bowe had just landed a T-38 training aircraft. Commander Steve Lindsay told NASA's senior management he was happy where he was.
We had a lot of conversations about it, and they convinced me that, you know, this is what they wanted me to do, and this is the right thing to do. And so eventually I said, okay, I would.
Lindsay was head of the astronaut office at the time. He had to give up his day job to fly Discovery. All this was months ago. Stott, knowing how things change, downplayed their role.
I don't think there's any of us that are latched onto the fact that we got assigned to this because it's the final shuttle flight.
Certainly prophetic words. A funny thing happened on the way to the launch pad. A major payload glitch on the Endeavour flight pushed that mission all the way to next February. And now NASA may add another flight after that. I caught up with Lindsay recently. Disappointed?
This flight is not about us. It's not about me. It's about this program. It's about the people. You know, we're flying on the shoulders of thousands of people over the years. And
that will be the singular message from the remaining crews. They may have the spotlight, but shouldn't be the focus.
The things this program has done are worth celebrating now.
Lindsay's crew will have the distinction of flying Discovery for its last time in space, bringing the shuttle program one flight closer to wheels stop for the last time. John Zarella, CNN at the Johnson Space Center in Houston.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. I'm Steve Lindsay, the commander of 133. I appreciate you guys hanging in there for an extra hour. Al had a few problems with his airplane, had to go back and get another one, so he was a little late getting down here, but we wanted to wait for him to get a chance to talk to you. It's great to be down here. What an exciting week down here with the air show going on for the next 3 days. Really wish we could see that. Unfortunately, we'll be locked in quarantine, so I hope you guys get a chance to go down there and do that. Well, I want to just say a word of thanks to the team here at Kennedy Space Center. As you know, we worked, they had a ohms crossfeed leak going on that they actually stopped the leak but decided to replace everything anyway. I think they changed out those seals in record time, did a good leak check, and did a fantastic job getting the vehicle ready, 100% ready to go, and still getting us ready for a November 1st launch. So hopefully, weather permitting, if all goes well, we'll have a nice November 1st on-time launch, and we're looking forward to it. So it's great to be down here. It's courtesy of the Air Force. So now let me hand the mic over to Eric Bowe, my pilot, to say a few words.
I'm Eric Bowe. I'm the pilot, as Steve said, and the F-15 overhead is always good to see. That was one of the airplanes I got to fly in the Air Force. I'd also like to echo what Steve said about thanking the crews, not only at Kennedy, but also thanking all the teams that got us ready for our flight. Excellent flyby going on at the same time as the air show is getting ready to go. And also I'd like to pass on our words to thank the people in Houston, Johnson Space Center, that got us ready to fly, all the teams there at Mission Control Center and the training teams as well. Now I'd like to pass it on to Alvin.
Good afternoon, I'm Alvin Drew, your MS-1, and the reason why you're sticking around late. Decided to take the scenic route here today with a bad jet, but we got to fly over top of the orbiter, And it looks like it's a beautiful orbiter ready to go, and the weather looks like it's going to be ready to go on Monday as well, so I think we're all set to go. Thanks to a lot of great preparation, especially from our training team back in Johnson Space Center, who spent a year with us, working morning, noon, and night, and sometimes late into the night, giving us the best possible training and also making it enjoyable. It's too bad that one of the unfortunate parts about the flight is the training stops once we get ready to go. We don't get to pick it back up again. And next will be Tim Copra.
Hi everybody, Tim Copra, MS2, and be doing the spacewalks with Al and some robotics. We're just really thankful to be here. It's a beautiful day at Kennedy Space Center, and we're really looking forward to the mission. You know, we had an opportunity to look at the payload bay in our last trip here and look at the payloads that have been prepared that we're going to attach onto space station, and looking forward to the permanent multi-purpose module and getting that attached onto space station, and want to thank all the people that have done such a great job in getting that ready to go for our mission. I'd like to hand it over to Mike Barrett.
Thanks very much. It's great to be back here again. We were able to talk with our friends on the space station this morning, and they have spent a lot of time getting everything ready up there for us. We have a huge collection of hardware up there, and I think we'll exceed 1 million pounds for the first time during our docked mission. And we just want to give a nod to the program office that puts the space station together and runs it. We're really looking forward to getting up there and doing our part to add to it yet again. And we just thank you also to the robotics folks. It's a very complicated mission from the robo standpoint, and we ask a lot of the robotic systems, and there was a lot of preparation in getting that together too. So thanks, and I think we're ready for that. And turn it over to my crewmate, Nicole Stott.
Hello, like everybody has said, it's really great to be back here. This place, I think, brings smiles to all of our faces for sure, and I know on launch day we'll be doing that. As Tim mentioned, we're bringing up some pretty cool stuff. We've got a permanent logistics module that we'll be attaching, and we have the ELC-4, which is basically an external carrier that will have some large spare parts for the station. So we really look forward to being able to put the station in the best possible configuration for future missions. And I'd like to also pass on our thanks to the EVA team who has helped prepare us. I get to be, thanks to them, the boss of Al and Tim while they're out doing the spacewalk, so I really look forward to that. That'll be 2 days of joy for me. And then for our launch control team, thanks in advance for getting us to orbit on Monday. And we look forward to the launch. And thanks to all of you for coming out. We really appreciate your support.
Thanks. Get a group shot. Sure.
Okay, we're ready to go to the bus. Ready? All right.
Welcome to this pre-countdown status briefing for STS-133, Discovery's mission to the International Space Station. We have two briefers here today to give us the latest on Discovery's preps for its upcoming launch. First off, we have Jeff Spaulding, NASA Test Director.
Good morning.
And Kathy Winters, the Shuttle Weather Officer.
Good morning.
We'll start off with the latest and I guess make a little bit of news here and then open it up to questions.
All right, and thank you, Allard, and good morning to everyone. And normally I would be here just providing our normal launch countdown status to you and updating you on the events leading up to the countdown and some of the major milestones. But last night when we were doing our tank press to flight mode, we did have a couple of leaks that occurred, and we tried to repair those overnight, and we weren't completely successful in doing so, which is going to cause a little bit more work today. As a result of that, we're going to need to delay the start of our launch countdown a day in order to accomplish the repairs required for those leaks that we had, and that would also move our launch date out one additional day to the 2nd of November from the 1st. So I'll talk a little bit about the issues that we have right now. As I mentioned, while we were doing our pressurization last night, our right-hand orbiter maneuvering system helium tank, it vented down unexpectedly when we were venting the ground side. Normally that doesn't happen. Those are generally isolated from each other, which indicated we had an issue with our air half or flight side coupling on between those two quick disconnects that fit together that allow the gases to flow back and forth. So we did attempt, as I mentioned, to do some troubleshooting and repairs on that were unsuccessful. We did, when we took the air half coupling or the flight side off, we did notice there was part of a seal or an O-ring in there that looked like it came from the ground half side. We did remove that, attempt to remate the disconnects and the couplings, and we still were unsuccessful with the repairs. So our forward plan at this point is to change out both the flight side and the ground side of those couplings, and we're going to work on that throughout the day. We've already been putting plans in place this morning to do that. We do, as a result of that, when we did our pressurization last night to the flight mass on the orbiter maneuvering system, we're going to have to vent those tanks back down again in order to do those repairs and the removal and replacement of those couplings. And then as we go back in throughout the day, then we'll have to do some additional leak checks and make sure that those things are ready to fly again before we hook them back up together and pressurize to our flight mass again. The big part of that whole process is the repressurization of those tanks, which is about 2 shifts or nearly 16 hours of work. The actual repairs and removal and replacement of those parts isn't very complicated, and we've done it in the past. These types of couplings are, we have had issues with different ones in the past, and so it's fairly common when we have to go off and do these, and it's a well-known process, and the folks do a really good job at that. But that's kind of the thing that's driving us, is the need to depressurize our tanks and then repressurize those. That repressurization of the tanks requires a pad clear, which precludes us from doing the normal things that we would do during the launch countdown. So as that goes throughout the day, we would not be able to pick up the launch countdown this afternoon if we had our pad clear doing the rest of those operations during the repressurization of those tanks. So that's why we made the decision to push off 24 hours for the start of the countdown and subsequently the launch date as well. We do have a couple of other smaller items. There was another issue with on our nitrogen side. It was a ground side tank fill, another one of those couplings that we're going to take the opportunity to fix when we get into the countdown as well. But that does not require any of the clears or the different things. It's a minor issue, and we can do that in parallel with the rest of our work. So as a result of those changes, that moves our launch countdown call to stations over a day, and we'll begin now at 1:30 on Saturday, and then that'll move our launch time out until Tuesday the 2nd at 4:12 for the beginning of the window and 4:17 for the middle of the window, which we normally shoot for. Some of the major events, our earliest tanking then would be at 6:52 on Tuesday morning as we work towards getting into that operation. We do have our Flight Day 3 and Flight Day 3 and 4 capabilities throughout our launch window. I think we maybe have talked that in the past. As it turns out, Tuesday is simply a Flight Day 3 rendezvous only, which makes our window about 10 minutes or so, so it'll be kind of a normal opportunity. Every other day after that, we have some Flight Day 4 capability, which essentially just adds a couple minutes to the window and changes when we rendezvous with the station. We have plenty of pad hold time this time. We have 8 days of liquid hydrogen, 7 of liquid oxygen, which is good because our window of opportunity to get off the ground is up through and including the 7th of November. So that would give us 6 days of attempts to get off the ground between the 2nd and the 7th. We will not be required to do any top-offs during that time frame if in fact we needed to use more days in going downstream. The mission's 11 days, as I think you all are aware of, with 1 contingency and 2 weather days. And the mission would bump a day over to Saturday the 13th at about 11 o'clock in the morning, just after that. We do expect lots of crowds and lots of interest in this launch. We got a lot of visitors coming to KSC, a lot of visitors coming to the local area. We have an air show over the weekend as well. We expect some folks to stay over from that to watch the launch. So we do expect a lot of folks in the county. And as many of you are aware, that's also Election Day on the 2nd, so there will be a lot of people out and about on that day. I think we've done a lot to encourage the folks that work at the Space Center to take the opportunity to do early voting and those types of things and make people aware of all those things to encourage them because it would be a challenge with all the folks around the area to be able to get out on a launch day and get out and get that voting done. So I think folks have done a pretty good job taking advantage of that as much as possible. So I think we're really happy that we have the folks and the teams that are here to be able to handle these types of things. These types of challenges are not uncommon for the team to step up and do what needs to be done. We're going to fly this vehicle when it's ready to go. And we'll take a look at it later today and make adjustments as required as far as the work we got to do. But I think we'll be able to get that done, and we're looking at getting in a call stations tomorrow. That's it. Thanks.
Kathy?
Well, the weather is looking very windy today, and then it improves for the weekend for the air show, and also as we get into Monday. And then as we get to Tuesday, we start getting concerned about some moisture that's going to be coming back up from the south as a strong trough dips into the Texas area in the upper levels. We think that trough's going to get cut off in that area. So the moisture will feed up from the south, but we're not expecting that front to come into the area mid-next week. Now, some of the models the last few days were actually toggling back and forth on that, but typically they do that with cutoff lows, and we typically see that a lot of times the lows just end up sitting in place over the area. So what we're expecting is that they'll sit in place, that low will sit in place over the Texas area. So with the moisture, we mainly are concerned about low cloud ceilings and a chance for some isolated showers in the area of the shuttle landing facility for the return to launch site abort constraints. And so with that, we have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch on Tuesday. We'll go ahead and get into our satellite picture. One thing to note is we do have a tropical storm Sherry that's out in the Atlantic, pretty much straight off to our east. That's not going to be an issue for us as the trough comes down and pushes that off to the northeast. One area we are watching is a wave that is down off of southeast of the Lesser Antilles. That tropical wave has a 60% chance of becoming a tropical cyclone, according to the Hurricane Center right now, within the next 48 hours. So with that, we'll be watching that. It should track northwest into the Caribbean over the next 4 to 5 days, and that's something we'll just keep watching as we get towards launch day. It's likely not going to be an issue for launch day in this area, but one thing I always like to keep an eye on is for the SRB recovery ships as they're recovering the following 2 days after launch. Again, though, right now, a lot of uncertainty with that, and a lot will depend on what happens with that on where that upper level low ends up being in about 5 to 6 days from now. So really won't be in our area around launch time, but we're looking for it on launch day to be somewhere south of maybe eastern Cuba or in the Hispaniola area on launch day. Going into our, let's go ahead and get into some of our forecasts. For our tanking forecast, we're expecting good weather overall, just some scattered skies. And there's a slight chance for a shower whenever we get those onshore gradient winds, but this morning we're expecting just light and variable winds. And it's mainly going to be on the southeast once we start getting into the afternoon hours. But for this time period, light winds and no concerns for tanking. As we get into our launch forecast, we expect the winds to pick up from the southeast, 10 peaking to 15 knots. We do have a chance for a ceiling to occur. We have a scatter deck there at 3,000 feet. There is a chance it could become broken. That's just one of our concerns, and also a chance for a shower in the area. So with that, we have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. If we do, for the SRB recovery weather, it looks really pretty good out there. It just sees 3 to 4 feet, winds from the southeast, again 10 to 15 knots. No concerns for SRB recovery during the launch day. If we do happen to, I keep wanting to go into delay, but we also want to talk about our CONUS abort sites. We do have good weather expected there, and for our TAL sites, 2 of our TAL sites are good. Going into the TAL site weather on the next slide. 2 of our TAL sites are good, Zaragoza and Marone. There is a concern for a headwind at Istris, peaking up to 30 knots there. If we do happen to delay 24 hours, we do expect more moisture in the area, a mid-level ceiling to come in, and also some high clouds as well. Again, we are concerned there is a chance that scatter deck at 3,000 feet could go broken and become a ceiling. If that happens to occur, that would be a violation. Also, we do expect that there could be a chance for some isolated showers in the area. But we didn't want to overstate this too much because that low is so far off to the west. And so with that, we have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. For the CONUS sites on day 2, everything looks good. And for our TAL sites, the weather actually improves at Istris, so we have 3 good TAL sites if we happen to delay 24 hours. And if we happen to delay 48 hours, again, we have similar weather conditions for those 3 days with, again, a ceiling of 25,000 feet. There is a chance that that scatter deck, again, at 3,000 feet could go broken, so we'll be watching that each day. Winds do shift around more from the north on this day, 12 peaking to 18 knots, a little bit stronger, but no violations there with the wind. And again, there could be an isolated shower in the area. We just have a chance for that. But overall, still just a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. The abort landing sites in the U.S. look good on day 3. And the TAL sites also look good with good weather overall out in that area. So overall, we're mainly just going to be watching for that moisture coming up from the south, looking for just a chance for a ceiling or a shower in the area, but overall a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch.
Okay, we'll open it up to questions now. Please state your name, news affiliation, and please wait for the microphone to come around. Start off with Marcia.
Press with 2 questions for Jeff. Any relation whatsoever with the previous fuel leak or any of the repairs that may have been going on attached to that? And secondly, well, you can answer that first, then I'll take it.
No, this is completely different than any of the other stuff that we've had to work on. This particular OHMS pod, the fuel leak that you had referred to earlier was a seal on a crossfeed flange, which is in a completely different location than this. These are fairly common as far as when we have issues with these QDs, and they're not significant as far as the ability to repair them. And so we've done that in the past plenty of times.
And how sure are you that it is the couplings? I mean, could it be something else that might even take longer to repair?
Well, we believe just based on what we saw on it, the coupling itself with the seal, actually some seal material that shouldn't have been there, we believe that because of that and the leak that it had, all of the other areas on the pod itself did not have any leaks. We were able to isolate the areas and those types of things. So we feel pretty confident from that perspective that the rest of the vehicle is in very good shape, and that these are some isolated things that we just need to repair.
James Dean from Florida today. Forgive me, I just want to make sure I'm understanding kind of where the leak issues are. Is it at the attachment between the lines you're using to load the gas and the vehicle? Is that
on the pod itself? There's an area in which there are different couplings where we can hook up lines to them that have either gas lines or fluid lines that connect to those areas, and this is under a normal servicing panel that's there. One of those lines that is a helium line that we use to pressurize these tanks to flight mass is in between that connection and the vehicle is where we had the leak, and we found some material there that says that there may be some contamination in that poppet on the flight side. Even though we were able to get it to seat to some extent, we're still concerned that it may not seat throughout the flight. So we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of that and change it out, as well as the ground side when we reconnect and go ahead and pressurize those tanks.
And you're talking about the fuel leak. Also, this pod was removed during the flow to replace a helium valve. That's also unrelated. Just kind of coincidence that all these things are happening in or around the area of this particular pod.
Yeah. And again, the fact that we have the ground half couplings or if even flight half couplings that leak is fairly common in as much as that we do see those during servicing operations and those types of things, and we often repair those either during those operations or in between missions and stuff. They have a propensity to have some leaks and some issues, especially during the mating process. You can have some issues with those. But these are completely separate locations, completely separate events.
Okay, Bill?
Bill Harwood, CBS. Just to follow that for a second, where that access panel is, if I'm looking at the back of the pod and there's an OHMS rocket nozzle, is the panel somewhere on that surface or is it somewhere else? That's where it is.
Yes, it's on the 5902 door, which is on the main servicing panel that's on that side. In the vertical, that would be underneath and coming up that way, and there's a rack that goes up there.
You mentioned traffic on Election Day. If it comes down to that's when you guys decide to do your launch. I realize this is not a question for you and it's for upper management, but since you're here, can you imagine that they would give any consideration to going to Wednesday, since you'd still have 5 launch days, and avoid the traffic with schools letting out and people trying to vote and all of that going on at the same time you guys are trying to launch?
The ability for us to launch on Tuesday actually becomes a little less complex than it would have been if we would have launched on Monday. The issue becomes an issue for us during this if we were to not be able to launch and had to do a scrub turnaround. The ability to send people home through the traffic and the types of things that we're expecting, combined with maybe some additional folks that are out for doing voting, would be more of an issue for people to be able to leave the Space Center to go home, get some rest, and come back to work. That won't happen until after that event. So it wouldn't really affect our first day of launch on Tuesday. It would be more a concern for Wednesday. We've set up a process in place to make sure that we understand through the supervisory chain that folks are able to get home, get appropriate rest, and get back to work. And if there are issues, we've set up some hotlines and some other types of things that we can make sure that we have all the right folks here and the ability to do the right thing with the team. And we'll make that evaluation prior to going into tanking if we need to.
Just for the record, you guys are pressing hard to make Tuesday if you can make it. And those issues, traffic, election, whatever, won't be a factor in the decision to press ahead.
Right now, that's the plan, correct.
How about Ken in the front? Yeah, sorry.
Hi, thank you. Ken Kramer for Spaceflight Magazine and the Planetary Society. Can you talk a little bit, Jeff, about the history of this type of repair? Is there any issue with it being, since you found it at the pad instead of in the VAB or the OPF, any difficulty with access or change in access?
Well, normally we wouldn't find this type of event in the VAB because we don't have these systems connected in that facility. Occasionally you will see this type of thing in the OPF, but often it's during when we're actually doing the fluid transfers and some of the gas transfers that we would do at the pad. And that servicing operation is normally performed at the pad because they're hazardous operations and they're performed at that particular location. We do also hook up these type of connections when the pod is removed from the vehicle down when it's doing its offline processing as well. So we do see those types of things. The repairs are generally the same in any of those locations, and generally it's just to remove and replace the components that they need to. And there's some soft goods in there and things, but they generally remove the whole poppet and replace it because it's easier to do so.
So has this particular repair ever been done at the pad before, or is this
yes.
the first time?
Sure.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Looking around for other hands. Anybody else? Okay, Marcia, you have a follow-up?
Associated Press for Jeff. What, as far as voting by the launch team, had you already taken that into account previously and instructed your teams to do early voting, or how are they going to be able to vote if they want to and also support a launch?
And that was something that we recognized, a long time ago, that the possibility for the dates to line up could be a realistic event. So we did encourage the team, we have throughout the entire pad flow, to take advantage of early voting, absentee voting, any other types of means, because we certainly want to give everybody the opportunity to get out and do that on Election Day, if they were unable to do so on Election Day. So we want to make sure that everybody has the ability to vote and to do those types of things. So I think we've done a pretty good job overall of making people aware that there could be potentially those things line up. And it would generally just be the folks that are there on launch day itself. It's the launch team, even though that's a lot of folks, but a lot of other people are not necessarily there. And the early voting process, I think here, at least in Brevard, goes all the way through, including Saturday. And we, like I said, we've been encouraging folks right along, providing information about where they can do voting and those types of things throughout the flow. So,
approximately, inclusive of?
In the prime firing room, there's probably about 125 folks in the prime firing room. There's a lot of other support functions that are out here, though, of course.
Okay, and James?
James Dean, Florida Today. Jeff, could you just detail again exactly the timing of the go-forward plan? When should these couplings have been replaced? When will the repress start and finish? And therefore, when will we know for sure that you are go to start, go out stations, pick up the countdown, all that tomorrow?
The details of exactly how those are working out are in a meeting that's going on currently, because this is really a late-breaking item, as you all are probably aware. So we are working out the details of exactly how, and we're sequencing the work. We started with the tank vent, which is already done at this point, to get us into a configuration so we can begin doing that additional work. We're prepping to do the coupling removal and replacements. We also have to gain access and remove another door and do some additional vent downs prior to getting into the final repress later. But it'll be this afternoon sometime. I don't have those specifics on the times because, again, those meetings are going on as we speak. For the removal and replacement of the parts,
yeah, okay.
Before we'll be able to get into the remainder of the
So your confidence level in turning around for the second is very high then?
Oh, right now I think it is. You know, and again, it'll as always is contingent upon the work. But we're very confident in the workforce. We trust their ability to do this job. There's just plenty of experience out there on this. So right now we don't have any real concerns.
Okay. Question?
I was just asking about the likelihood on Tuesday. I know with the, I understand the election's not having any consideration as to whether or not you guys are going to go up, but the likelihood of it happening that day, I know we have a lot of people wondering, you know, it's going to be an intense day, but the likelihood of it happening on Tuesday, what do you see, which was at this point?
Well, assuming we get the repair done, which you know at this point we're assuming that we are, you know, we would launch on that date as a launch date. I think that that was asked a little bit earlier, but we would use that date if in fact we can get the work done to get to that point.
Bill?
Just one more really quick one. What is the nitrogen in this case used for? The issue with the nitrogen coupling, what is that system used for?
It's used both for valving and also for ullage pressure on some of the smaller tanks that we have in there. Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions?
Chow for space.com. Question for Jeff. You mentioned that when the leaks were discovered, you tried to do some overnight repairs. I'm just wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about what you attempted to do and why they were unsuccessful overnight.
Well, the standard process is to remove and inspect both sides to see if there's any obvious either contamination, scoring, things that may have caused the system to leak. And then if they look good, we'll go ahead and remate them and then try again. Sometimes they reseat themselves, these poppets do. Sometimes we can bump up the pressure a little bit, cause them to reseat, and we try all of those different things. And in this case, we did see some contamination there. As I mentioned, there was some portion of a seal there that should not have been in that location. We removed that, remated, and attempted to try to get the system to lock up. And we did get it to eventually lock up, but we weren't really comfortable with that configuration at this point, knowing that there was possibly some contamination in that poppet. So.
Mark Boucher, Space Ref. How many times has this happened at the pad?
I don't have the exact number, how many times. We can probably get that at some point.
For you. Okay, anything else? Okay, not seeing any other questions. I guess it's needless to say, but I guess I'll say it. The TV schedule and the briefing schedules are in flux, and we're in the process of reevaluating that right now to get all that locked in, so I can't exactly tell you when our next briefing will be. But please stay tuned to NASA.gov and to www.nasa.gov/shuttle. That'll have the updated shuttle schedule as well as the briefing schedule, and we'll have that on later today. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for today's STS-133 pre-countdown status briefing for the STS-133 launch to the International Space Station. Joining me today is Jeff Spaulding, NASA Test Director.
Good morning.
And Kathy Winters, Shuttle Weather Officer.
Good morning.
We'll hear from our panelists and then take questions. Jeff?
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. And I'm here today to provide you some status on where we are on from yesterday. As you remember, we briefed a preliminary plan on some repairs we needed to do to try to get into our launch countdown today. The plan, as we knew it yesterday, was to vent down our tank and remove and replace some parts that we thought were faulty on an air-half coupling on our right-hand OMS maneuvering system pod, and then do some leak checks. And as we went through the day yesterday, we learned that there was some additional work that we needed to do. As sometimes when you get into the job, you get a little bit smarter, and we did, and there were some things that we, because those meetings were actually still going on when we were talking yesterday, there was quite a bit more work, it turned out, that we needed to do from a leak check perspective and some of the venting operations that need to be done. As a result of that, we're a little bit down on our timelines that we had briefed yesterday, and so the ability for us to get into call to stations today for launch countdown is no longer available to us. So our plan today is to go ahead and continue the work that we need to do on the repair and then getting back into flight configuration on the OMS pod. And then right now we're going to target a call to stations for tomorrow, for Sunday at 1:30 in the afternoon, which would move our launch date out an additional day to Wednesday the 3rd. some of the things that we learned as we went along yesterday that changed our plan, we found that there were some, we planned on venting down the tank, and as part of that operation there was some additional venting that had to be completed that required some configuration of valving that caused some, that we needed to get in and actually remove a door and a panel and change the configuration on some of our valving. And so as a result of that and some additional leak checks that needed to be done, some intermediate ones and some intermediate pressurizations that we hadn't accounted for in our preliminary plans, that just essentially drove our timelines out. Thus far, we've vented down the tanks that we talked about yesterday, both the intermediate and the final ventings. We've removed the doors and have done all of the things that we needed to get into the repair. We did remove and replace our air half coupling and the ground half coupling that we talked about yesterday, the parts that were faulty on the tank, and we've done some initial leak checks on those and also some moisture samples, and all of those came back good at this point, the initial ones. I have with me sort of a representation. This is actually a propellant air half coupling, and but it is very similar to the helium one that we had to repair on the vehicle to give sort of a representative size and shape to what it looks like. This front part here, or the head of it where the cage is, would represent the part that sticks out from the panel, the servicing panel itself, that represents the area in which we would hook up a ground side quick disconnect to it. There's a poppet inside of here that actually depresses when the two are mated, and the ground hand side would have a device that actually goes inside of there to be able to push that and depress it, and then allows the gases or fluids to transfer between it. As I mentioned, this is a propellant one and not the helium one, but again, they're very similar in function and in what they look like. I think we also have a couple of slides that we can go ahead and show you too, to give a sort of a representation of where they are on the vehicle and orient you to how that looks. This is the location of where the panel is, where the air half coupling is that we removed and replaced. It's on the very back of the ohms pod on the right-hand side, down towards the bottom, next to the nozzle area there. And I think we have a little closer one up on the next slide. And that gives a little bit better perspective, and you can see it's kind of up and underneath, so it is above the folks' heads that would have to work on that operation. Normally we would have access panels and those types of things that are not shown in this picture to give us plenty of ability to get in there and do that work. But that's where the panel's located, and on the next slide, that's the panel itself, and you can see some of the other air half couplings that are sticking out on there. On the lower left-hand side is where the one that we had to change out on the helium system, that was the one giving us the problems in our inability to finish the operations we needed to do to get into launch. And then we did also take the opportunity here overnight to remove and replace one that was leaking on our nitrogen side. It was on the upper right-hand side there, and we removed and replaced that air half coupling as well. So those operations are actually done. And let's see, is there another slide? That's sort of a schematic right there that shows you the air half coupling that I was showing you in my hand. And beneath the cage part, which is the top head, there's the poppet itself, there's a spring, there's two seals, and also a filter that's inside of there. And all of the interior of that poppet is removed. The cage and the exterior portions that you see there all stay in place on the vehicle. Those are not removed. But the interior part unscrews, and all those interior pieces come out, and those are the things that were removed and replaced overnight. So as I mentioned, that work's all done and behind us, and the preliminary leak checks look good. But we do still have some additional ones once we get up to flight pressure, which will give us further confidence that we got a good repair. Right now we're in the process of doing a pressurization. This is an initial pressurization of the tanks. It's called a cheat load. And as part of that, we will bring the pressure up and do some additional leak checks. This is something we hadn't accounted for yesterday when I was speaking with you, and that we talked about. They had discussions throughout the day and learned again that we needed to do this. Normally when we're in configuration to go do our final press to flight mass, we are at a higher pressure than we were as a result of this repair. Since we've ended the tanks all the way down to ambient, we had to come back in, and now we have to get them up to an intermediate pressure before we can go and pressurize again to our flight mass. So that's what we're doing this morning, and that just started, and will take several hours to get us into the early afternoon hours. At that point, we have a couple of lines that we need to reconnect, and then go ahead and we'll start the rest of our operation, which is the 16-hour portion of the pressurization to flight mass. And we'll get into that hopefully later this afternoon or early evening, and that'll take us through tomorrow morning and get us in a good shape to pick up the countdown tomorrow afternoon at 1:30, as I mentioned. So right now we look like we're on a good path to get there. We'll continue to track and monitor that work throughout the day and the night to make sure that we can get there, and we'll let folks know if there's any changes to that. As I mentioned, our call stations is tomorrow at 1:30. The earliest tanking time would be at 6:27 on Wednesday morning, as that would put us to a new T0 time on Wednesday of 3:47 in the afternoon for a window open, and then of course about 5 minutes after that at 3:52 would be our targeted T0 time. We do have both Flight Day 3 and 4 capabilities off and on every other day throughout the window, as we mentioned yesterday. Wednesday is a day that has both Flight Day 3 and 4 capability, which means instead of a 10-minute window, we have about 3 extra minutes of window in there for that. So that does give us a little bit more margin to get off the ground if we would need that on launch day. Right now, then, launching on Wednesday, we still have up through and including Sunday, so that gives us 5 days of attempts to get off the ground, and that would give us our normal 4 and 5 day capability that we like to preserve. That gives us the maximum chance to get off the ground on any of our launches. So that does still preserve that ability and gives us lots of flexibility and lots of margin to get off the ground. And with that, I think we're really confident. The team has done an excellent job overnight. It's been a lot of hard work. They've addressed all of the issues as they've occurred throughout the time. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work that goes into these types of things. And I think we've done a great job, and we're looking forward to getting into call to stations tomorrow. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. Kathy.
Well, it does look like that we are going to be having a front come down into the southeastern U.S. on our new launch day. With that, and also an upper-level trough that's dipping down into Texas, we should pull in some moisture into Florida on that day, causing just some concern for a low cloud ceiling and also some isolated showers in the area. We are going with a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch due to that. Overall, it doesn't look like it's going to be any widespread phenomenon. It just seems that it could give us a chance of some kind of isolated showers or even possible ceiling in the area. Another thing we're watching is Tropical Storm Tomas, which is down in the Caribbean. If we go ahead and look at the satellite picture, you can see Tomas is going to be is marching towards west-northwest. You can see it down there, entering the area of the Lesser Antilles. And it's marching northwest and going to be heading into the Caribbean for the next 5 days. By launch day, we're expecting it. The Hurricane Center is forecasting Tomas to be Category 2 transitioning to 3 around that time period south of Hispaniola. So that will definitely be something we'll just keep an eye on. Of course, not an immediate threat to launch, but we'll watch it in case it's going to be an issue for the SRB recovery folks as they spend a couple more days recovering the SRBs after launch day. And go ahead and show you the forecast from the Hurricane Center tracking the storm off to the northwest, if we have that slide. There we go. And you can see that how it will be pushing into the Caribbean and moving just south of Hispaniola by the time we get to launch. And again, a Category 3 hurricane, it's expected to be by that time. It was almost a hurricane this morning on the latest update, so possibly in this next update that we'll see in an hour from the Hurricane Center may already be a hurricane. Going into our forecast for launch, looking at our tanking forecast, weather looks pretty good overall for tanking, just a little bit breezy. We were expecting a little bit windier conditions on Tuesday than we were when we were talking yesterday, so and even northeast winds, so it's kind of nice that we delayed 1 day in a way because crosswinds are actually starting to become a concern for Tuesday. But for Wednesday, the winds are going to be decreasing and discussing up to 15 knots for tanking. Just a 5% chance of violating tanking constraints just in case we do happen to get an isolated thunderstorm form over the Gulf Stream, but unlikely to occur. Going into our launch forecast, we are, again, just concerned about low cloud ceilings and isolated showers in the area. Not a big chance for this, but we did go with a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. And for SRB recovery, we're expecting some windy conditions Tuesday, so seas are going to be picking up out there, and so by launch day, we're still expecting 5 to 6 foot seas out in the SRB recovery area, but that's well within constraints. For Spaceflight Meteorology Group's forecast for our abort landing sites in the U.S., we are expecting very good conditions for both Edwards and Northrop, not expecting any concerns. And also for the Taos sites, weather looks very good on launch day as well. If we do happen to delay 24 hours, we start to have that front move down through Florida on this day. We're not expecting a lot of weather with this front, but there could be some isolated showers in the area, and also, again, a concern for low cloud ceilings. So with that, we do have that slight concern for showers and a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. For the abort landing sites in the U.S., Spaceflight Meteorology Group is forecasting good weather again, and they are also forecasting good weather for all 3 TAL sites on day 2. If we happen to delay 48 hours, the front should move through Florida by this time. We do expect the winds to get kind of breezy behind the front. The direction isn't too bad for us, though, from 010. The launch wind constraints begin around 20. They range from 23 knots to 34 knots, depending on the direction. From that direction, we would get concerned if it starts gusting up around 23 to 24 knots. So with that, we do have a 20% chance of KSU weather prohibiting launch. And again, the abort landing sites are good on day 3. And the TAL sites are only concern on day 3. Oh, actually, we have good TAL sites all 3 days on day 3 as well. So overall, weather is just have a little bit of a concern on launch day for showers and ceilings in the area. Overall, it's not going to be a washout, but we do have that 30% chance of KSU weather prohibiting launch due to those concerns.
Thank you, Kathy. We'll now take questions. When the microphone comes your way, please state your name, affiliation, and to whom you're addressing your question. I will start over in the corner with Bill.
Bill Harwood, CBS for Jeff. With the timeline as it's laid out right now, is it tight, or have you got margin in there to get to Wednesday, or is there still a challenge out in front of you?
We still have margin in that timeline. We got several hours of margin, I believe, and so as a result of that, we feel pretty good about getting back into getting our ability to get back into count.
Chris.
Chris Gebhardt with NASASpaceflight.com. Do you have an estimated time for tank repress completion tomorrow morning?
We expect or hope that it would be done somewhere between 6 and 8 tomorrow morning is our goal at this point, to try to get to that.
Marcia?
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press, with 2 questions. Given that you have a Flight Day 4 opportunity for Wednesday, if you go to Wednesday, try to launch, would you definitely try for that Flight Day 4 rendezvous if you need to?
Yes. Yes, we would.
And is there any sense of, even slight sense of secondary relief that you didn't have to deal with the Election Day complications?
I wouldn't say that there's relief. Certainly, I think it gives us a little bit more breathing room for a lot of the folks and maybe some other opportunities. We always want to make it as uncomplicated as possible for our team and be able to get them home in between launches, which is what was our biggest concern, and get them the rest that they need so they can get back to work. So if that move helps that in any way, certainly that's a good thing.
Ken.
Oh, Ken Kramer, Spaceflight Magazine for Jeff, please. I'd like to know, this additional work you did, was this more invasive into the OMS pod than you initially envisioned? And what is the difference between this initial pressurization and the 16-hour repressurization, please?
The work itself was not more invasive. It was just more of the work that we needed to do. As I did mention yesterday, there were meetings still going on developing our plans. We had some initial plans in place as to what we thought was the scope of the work, and we hadn't fully, obviously, defined all of that at that particular point in time. We thought we had our arms around the big nuggets, but there were some substantial things that we still needed to do that were defined after our discussion yesterday. The additional pressurization that we're doing this morning was, as I mentioned, because the tanks were vented all the way down in order to do the repair. We weren't starting at a normal place where we would to get into that final 16-hour pressurization. So we have to get ourselves up to a point in time where we can get to the ability to press to that final 16-hour thing later this afternoon. So that's why it took us a little bit. There was more work involved from yesterday to today, and it was one of the things that came out actually probably while we were talking yesterday that we discovered.
Chris.
Chris Gebhardt with NASASpaceflight.com for a question for Kathy. You mentioned the watching the sea states and the winds out at the SRB recovery zone. Is that I'm a little confused. Is that a result of Tomas or the frontal system that'll be moving through?
For launch day, it's not the storm. It's the gradient winds that occur the day before, and that's what would cause the seas to be up a little bit, just 6 feet. I mean, they can certainly work in those conditions. Really, they start getting more concerned when we get over 8 feet out there, and then they start looking at the wave period. and direction, and then if it's over 10 feet, they usually will just spot the SRBs and hold off.
Mark Kirkman, Interspace News for Jeff. Can you just clarify, since you already did the pressurization prior to the initial, what we thought was going to be called the stations, for this you only depressurized the right ohms helium and nitrogen tanks, right? So those are the only two tanks that you have to repress today, is that correct?
Well, yes, there's multiple tanks within the ohms pod, but yes, it's on the right-hand side. It's those tanks on the helium side and on the nitrogen side as well that we had to go back and then repair, and as a result, depressurize.
And can you refresh me on, I think you're talking ultimately flight mass is close to like 4,000 PSI, what the difference is between that initial level you start at and how you get up, what the final number is?
I don't know the actual difference between the two and where we end up finally on that, so we can get that data for you, though, certainly.
James Dean with Florida Today. Jeff, hopefully you won't be getting down to that last attempt on the 7th, but that does still cost you a +1 day if you get there right. Can you just talk about what that would do to your mission potentially to not have a +1 day? Is there any loss of work that you would do, or is it just something where if something came up you would deal with it mid-mission, or just what does it mean to not have that when you launch?
The +1 at this point is a contingency only. All the work is still planned and defined within the other 2 EVAs that we have scheduled for this mission. And, and of course we feel good about that. On orbit things can happen and change. That's why we often like to protect for a contingency day downstream. But I'm certain that they'd be able to rework the schedules to get the maximum amount of things done on orbit.
Also just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what the crew's doing with this extra couple days that they'll spend here. I'm sure they're doing some more STAs and whatnot. What else is going on with the crew?
Normally, it's more additional training, just like you said, and they have more opportunity to do some of those things. Often there's a little bit more relaxation time in there as well. I don't have exactly how much time they have for that, but generally they do like to have some of that extra time too, just to review all of the different things that they need to for these flights and these missions. That's because they're so critical and there's so much that they often have to do, and it does give them some extra time to do that. So sometimes that does actually add some benefit to them as well.
Bill.
And just for the record, I'm assuming the strategy would be try 2, stand down, and then try 2 more.
That's exactly
right. So you
right.
get 4 attempts out of the rest of the window.
Right. We have our standard plan would be to do that 4 and 5 days, and then of course whatever happened along the way would dictate how that worked out.
Are there any further questions? Ken.
Hi, Ken Kramer for Spaceflight Magazine. For Kathy, is there any chance that hurricane is going to be coming up here if that if the launch does get delayed?
Well, the models, and I was looking pretty far out, and there was a northeast turn at the end of some of the models, not towards Florida so much, actually more off to the east. So it's always a possibility. It'll depend on the timing of when that comes into the Caribbean and the timing of the trough, and if the trough puts more shear on it before it actually would make a move to the northeast. So it's something we'll watch. It's pretty far out right now. This far out, a lot of things can happen. And so we just monitor it, and as the time comes, we'll deal with it if we need to. And I'll watch it for the SRB recovery area for the 2 days following launch while they're still out there working.
Any further questions? That will conclude today's STS-133 pre-countdown briefing. Events and milestones for the countdown will be posted on our webpage at www.nasa.gov/shuttle. Just to recap, the launch for STS-133 to the International Space Station now is planned for Wednesday, November 3rd at 3:52 p.m. with a 1:30 call to stations tomorrow afternoon, which means the countdown clock would begin ticking down at 2 p.m. Please join us live on NASA television today at noon Eastern Time for the progress docking at the International Space Station, followed by a 2 p.m. launch health news conference here at Kennedy Space Center. Thank you. Good morning and happy Halloween. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the pre-countdown status briefing for Space Shuttle Discovery's STS-133 launch. Joining me today is Steve Payne, NASA Test Director.
Good morning.
And Kathy Winters, Shuttle Weather Officer.
Good morning.
We'll hear from our panelists and then take questions. Steve?
Thank you. Well, I'm proud to be here today to bring you status on our upcoming countdown for the launch of Discovery on the STS-133 mission. I'm here to represent the team that's been working so hard to get Discovery ready to fly. This is going to be Discovery's 39th and final flight, and it's going to be bringing the permanent multi-purpose module up to the space station, as well as the Express Logistics Carrier number 4 and the Robonaut to the space station as well. We expect a lot of interest on this one, and we expect a very good turnout for launch countdown. Work is currently on schedule as we prepare Discovery for launch on Wednesday afternoon. We completed early this morning our flight pressurization of our on-orbit control system tanks and the main propulsion tanks, and all went well. That is behind us now. We've resolved our remaining issues with our nitrogen quick disconnect poppet valve. It turns out it was a ground support equipment valve upstream that was providing too much pressure and not allowing the poppet to close. We isolated that with another valve upstream of that, and we're able to close the poppet, and the leak is now behind us. So those issues that we were having are now resolved, and we're pressing on for our call to stations at 13:30 this afternoon. All right. Call to stations, like I said, at 13:30. We'll begin the clock at 2 p.m. We'll get it right into final checkout and configuration of our avionics control systems. We'll begin preparations for loading of the fuel cell reactants. That begins the preparations tonight. We'll be clearing the pad at 6 o'clock Saturday morning, do our pyrotechnics checks, and then go into reactant loading at 11:30. The pad should reopen at about 6 p.m. on Monday evening, and we'll begin offloading 180 pounds of liquid oxygen from our reactant tanks to get our appropriate flight load. That adds about 4 hours to our countdown schedule. This is why it's a little bit longer than typical. Checkout of our orbiter and ground communications network is planned for Tuesday afternoon, starting at about 13:30 or 1:30 p.m. local. It's followed by final flight crew equipment stow at 3 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon. By 7 on Tuesday evening, the rotating service structure will be retracted, and we'll begin our final crew module configuration for load. Just before midnight on Tuesday, we're looking at the countdown clock to resume its count at T-minus 11 hours. Then we'll begin final loading preparations and begin clearing the pad just after 1 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. Earliest tanking time is at 6:27 a.m. on Wednesday morning. We expect about 3 hours of tanking. The flight crew should arrive at the pad just after noon on Wednesday. This is a space station mission, obviously, and it's a 10-minute duration window, approximately, and it opens at 3:47 on Wednesday the 3rd. We always target the middle of the window, and there are some seconds adjustment for a day of launch parameters. We have opportunities from the 3rd through the 7th of November, so that gives us 5 days, and we have our typical 4 attempts in 5 days scenario we can use if we need it. We have, on the 3rd of November, we have both Flight Day 3 and Flight Day 4 rendezvous opportunities, so we can use either of those if we needed to. That would add about 3 minutes to our launch window. And we have that every other day, starting on the 3rd and then every other day from there. We have through the 7th to launch. There are, starting on the 8th of November, we have a beta angle constraint, which doesn't allow us to go dock to the station due to thermal constraints. After that, there are a number of other constraints. There's a small window of opportunity early December should we need that. Our pad hold time is plenty adequate. We have 7 days of liquid oxygen hold time, 8 of liquid hydrogen. That's outside of our launch window, so we don't have to worry about doing any top-off or reactant offload during the count. It's an 11-day mission with 1 day contingency and 2 weather contingency days should we need them as well. Our end of mission is currently planned for 9:59 Eastern on Sunday, November the 14th. And so far, it's been a remarkable flow for Discovery. She's been an incredible vehicle, and she kept along a distinguished career with this particular flight. She's always amazed us with everything that she can do, and we expect this flight should be no different. And we're looking forward to launch on Wednesday afternoon.
Thank you. Kathy?
Well, we are going to be watching an upper level low over the next few days that'll be dipping down into the area of the western Gulf of Mexico. What that will do here for us on launch day is draw some moisture up from the south. And as that occurs, we'll just be a little bit concerned about low cloud ceilings and also having some showers within 20 nautical miles of the shuttle landing facility. So with that, we do have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. Now, if we happen to delay a day, the weather becomes much more problematic. It looks like that frontal boundary is going to be pushing down into the area of central Florida, causing more concerns for showers and even possibly a thunderstorm in the Central Florida area. So with that, we did increase the probability if we happen to delay 24 hours up to a 40% chance for Thursday. So right now, though, looking like just 30% chance on launch day of violating constraints. Let's go ahead and look at the satellite picture. We do have Hurricane Tomas we're keeping an eye out for. It's moved through the Lesser Antilles and is now moving into the Caribbean, and it's a Category 2 hurricane. It's forecast to, by launch day, be south of Hispaniola and still be Category 2 at that time. The Hurricane Center is expecting that the storm will just continue to march towards the west-northwest. Now, at the end of that time period, the models tend to want to pull the storm a little more northeast, but as that front moves through that I was talking about for Thursday, as it pushes in to that area, it'll draw that storm northeast likely. The furthest east I think it would come, at least right now so far the way it looks, it would be the southeastern portion of the Bahamas moving northeast. So it doesn't look like it would be a direct threat to Florida. We'll watch it to see if it's going to increase the seas for the SRB recovery area at the end of the week. I'm actually just more concerned that the winds behind the boundary will do that for Friday as they're returning. So overall right now it doesn't look like that storm is going to threaten our launch date or be an issue for Florida, at least right now. But we do continue to monitor these because we know how unpredictable sometimes they can be 5 to 7 days out on the forecast. So let me go ahead and show you the Hurricane Center's forecast for Tomas. You can see that track that I was talking about bringing the storm into the area south of Hispaniola and making a slight turn to the north at the end there. And again, at that point, the models, most of them have the influence of that trough affecting the storm, pulling it northeast. So it would likely be under a lot of shear as it gets under the influence of the trough as well. So it would likely become extratropical as it moves off into the Atlantic in the long-range forecast. Let's go ahead and get into our forecast for launch. Our tanking forecast still looks good. We do just have some scattered skies in the low levels with the high ceiling in the area. We expect to see winds from the east-northeast, 10 peaking to 15 knots, and temperatures right around 74 degrees. Good weather overall for tanking. Just went with a slight chance of violating constraint at 5% in case the front happens to move along a little bit more quickly than expected. For our launch forecast, overall, the sky conditions look good in the low levels. We do expect a ceiling on and off around the 9,000-foot area. Winds will be from the east, 11 peaking to 17 knots. The models have toggled around quite a bit on the wind direction, and so we're keeping an eye on that. But right now, so far, it's within constraints, and there's a chance of showers in the area. Overall, a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. SRB recovery looks good overall with seas just a little bit high at 5 to 6 feet. In that area, winds from the east 12 to 17 knots. Again, I'm more concerned for them as we get into Friday and that front moves through and the winds will pick up and that could increase the seas in that area, and we'll be briefing them tomorrow morning for SRB recovery. For Spaceflight Meteorology Group's forecast for the abort landing sites in the U.S., the weather does look good both at Edwards and at Northrop Field. And for the TAL sites, we do have 3 good TAL sites on the first day with no significant weather issues. If we do happen to delay 24 hours, this is a day that we think we'd be mostly influenced by the front coming into the area. We do have a chance for showers on this day. Also, thunderstorms could be in the area, mainly over in the Gulf, but anvils could stream in for those thunderstorms. The high clouds that come off the top, those can be a triggered lightning threat. With that, we have a 40% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. The abort landing sites in the U.S. remain good on day 2. And Spaceflight Meteorology Group only has a slight concern at Zaragoza, where a chance for the visibility to come down to 4 miles in fog. If we do happen to delay 48 hours, so the front should move through Florida. Again, this is the same front that would be pulling Tomas off to the northeast if Tomas was in that location down in the Caribbean that the Hurricane Center is forecasting. And at this point, we'd mainly be concerned about low cloud ceilings in the area, and also winds are getting a bit strong. And if they turn from 350, they're about the ground wind constraint is 27 knots, but it starts to drop as we turn more northerly. So if it came straight from the north, it would be down to 23 knots. Forecasting right now a peak wind of 21 knots. So I did increase the probability on this day to a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. The abort landing sites, again in the U.S., still look good on the third day. And we have similar concerns at the TAL, at Zaragoza, one of the TAL sites, just a chance for 4 miles in fog, but overall 2 other good TAL sites, both at Marone and Istris. So we'll keep an eye on Tomas, but right now it doesn't look like it would be a factor for launch. And our main concern will just be if we happen to delay. So right now, launch day, we have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. If we happen to delay 24 hours, that's when a front will come into the area and we have more concerns. And we'll keep watching that trend. If it looks like the models are going to keep timing it out that way, we may have to increase that 24-hour delay number if they come in line better. Right now, there's some differences on the timing of that, so we're just keeping it at 40% for day 2. But day 1, it's still looking good.
Thank you. We'll now take questions. When the microphone comes your way, please state your name, affiliation, and to whom you're addressing your question. We'll start with Bill.
Hi, Bill Horowitz, CBS News for Steve. Would you, what did the troubleshooting show where the problem was? I was confused. Was that both nitrogen and helium or just helium?
Well, initially we'd had 2 different issues with our quick disconnects, one with a nitrogen side and one with a helium side. The one that was a long pull, the one that took us a long time to resolve, was the one on the helium side because it required venting down our tanks and repressurizing, and that just takes a long time because you have to do it slowly to allow the thermal conditioning to happen. For the nitrogen tank, it's fairly straightforward. It's a quick process. The tank is about the size of a softball, so it takes a couple of minutes to fill and empty. We thought it was a quick disconnect valve, and I believe you saw one of these earlier. It's the same kind of quick disconnect valve. There's a little poppet inside that's held open by pressure, and when the pressure goes down, it closes again. The valve that was supposed to stop supplying pressure to it was providing too much, and it couldn't close properly. So we just went upstream and closed the gas off to that one so that the pressure would bleed down and the QD could close. And it worked very well.
Well, I guess what I was asking was, are you saying then that there really wasn't anything wrong with the shuttle hardware? It was an issue on the ground side that you guys just didn't see?
Well, once you pull it out, it's hard to go back and determine that. We changed it. It turns out it could have been both, or it could have been just one. At this point, we don't know once we take it out. But the valve we had originally had been there since the initial build of the vehicle, and we'd never had any issues with it. And that was back in the early 80s, I believe.
So now everything's buttoned up, and you guys are pretty confident.
Everything's
Unless something else
buttoned up.
comes up, you'll get there.
Correct, and we're going to spend the rest of the afternoon putting the area back together, disconnecting all the ground support equipment, and putting the doors back on. So that is behind us, fortunately.
Are there any other questions? Over here, please.
Denise Chow for Space.com. Just a quick question to clarify for Steve. The repressurization, has that been completed or is that ongoing today?
Of the
engine pods?
Well, yes, all the repressurizations are complete at this point. The helium tanks were repressurized and they were done early this morning. The nitrogen tank we repressurized as I was getting out here, and the pressure was holding fine. So we believe that's at this point done.
Okay, are there any further questions? Okay, Bill again, please.
Since I promised Kathy a question yesterday. No, I'm kidding. What is SMG saying? I mean, you guys always look at launch weather, and I know that you fold some of what SMG says, but I know they're listing constraints for all of those days in terms of chance of showers and all that stuff. So how
Right.
confident are they, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, we actually coordinate our forecast, and that probability does cover their constraints. So we talk every morning to make sure that our forecasts are all lined up. And the main reason why we're keeping the number at 40% for day 2, even though it lists a lot of violations, is because the uncertainty that we have in the forecast and the trend, the changing of the trend, we just wanted to trend it up. Now tomorrow, if it continues to look as it looks on the models today, with that front more solidly where it is, consistently, I should say, more consistently, then we're going to bump that number up again. We considered it today for that day 2, but we didn't quite do it. And on the first day, they listed a chance of a shower, so that's why we have the number at 30%. So we do talk and coordinate all that, and that's all into consideration.
Sure that they're as confident as you are that things would
Yeah,
generally
we've been talking each morning and saying, well, hopefully one of these days the models will all line up, and we expect that to happen as we get closer to launch day.
Ken, you had a question?
Thank you, Ken Kramer for Spaceflight Magazine. For Kathy, is there any particular time of the day when these showers are more likely? Is the afternoon the most likely time?
Well, usually we get an easterly type flow that are actually more likely in the morning, but the moisture is increasing in this case in the afternoon too. So it's probably pretty even on how much chance we have of showers in the morning and showers in the afternoon. So we have it listed on both the tanking and the launch forecast. So usually morning time would be more, and then as you get in the afternoon, the sea breeze will actually squelch these a bit. But in this case, with that moisture advection, there's still a chance for a shower. Now, as we get in the overnight hours, we would expect them to increase again. The water gets warmer than the atmosphere, and so you get a little more instability, and you get a better chance for showers in the overnight hours when you have an easterly flow pattern.
For Steve, you mentioned that this valve had not been changed on Discovery since it was built. Curious about Atlantis and Endeavor. What's the history there, if you know?
That's a good question, but I don't know the answer.
We can look that up and get it for you. Okay. If there are no further questions, we'll conclude today's pre-countdown status briefing. As a reminder, the countdown begins this afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. That's not on NASA television. The next NASA TV briefing will be tomorrow with the pre-launch news conference, which is expected to begin no earlier than 11 a.m. Eastern. For more information on the STS-133 crew and mission, please visit www.nasa.gov/shuttle. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the STS-133 pre-launch news conference for Space Shuttle Discovery's mission to the International Space Station. Joining me today is Mike Moses, Chair of the Pre-Launch Mission Management Team.
Good morning.
Mike Leinbach, Shuttle Launch Director.
Good morning.
And Kathy Winters, Shuttle Weather Officer.
Good morning.
We'll hear from our panelists and then we'll take questions. Mr. Moses.
Thanks, Kendra. Well, let's see. Welcome, everybody. We had our L-2 mission management team meeting this morning. Went very quickly. If I wouldn't have talked about how quickly it was going, it would have gone even faster. We didn't have any technical issues to discuss. Kathy will talk to you about the weather. We got a good briefing on what's in front of us with some of the fronts coming in and the tropical storm system down to the south. And I'll let her go into all that stuff. But again, no technical issues. Everybody pulled go to head into count. No problems whatsoever. You know, the last several days, and if you want to back up even more than that with the fuel leak that we had, it's been a very challenging time for the team. Some of those issues are more frustrating than anything. The two helium, or the helium leak and the nitrogen leak, the two gas leaks we had, were very straightforward in terms of how to fix them, but they had a lot of overhead that went along with them in terms of the hazardous ops required and the vents and the work to get in there. And it's like working on your car. You gotta fix it, repair it, and then hook it back up and then check it and see if you got it working right. And sometimes that gets a little frustrating for the teams, but they held together beautifully. They performed outstanding, working all weekend long and got everything buttoned up. We needed to take a little bit of extra time, mostly for those constraints that we were talking about with the hazardous clears. And once that was done, we're sitting there in great shape out at the pad. The mission's in great shape. A couple-day delay there is not going to change the mission timeline at all. The launch window's all good too. We have all the way through the 7th. The teams back in Houston have been working kind of behind the scenes right before, right around FRR time frame last week. The orbiter team was working on some ways to possibly increase the thermal limits that we're allowed to go to, what we call beta angle, which is the sun angle. When the shuttle's by itself, we can kind of maneuver and get to we call it a PTC, a passive thermal control, where we basically do a barbecue roll, so to speak, a rotisserie with the shuttle, where we roll it so that not one side's always facing at the sun. That lets it stay evenly heated. When we're docked to station, we can't do that, so our thermal limits docked to station become a problem. So they looked at expanding our ability to take care of our thermal limits after we undock, and that's starting to look pretty good. The station team's looking at what we can do while we're docked. We may be able to find a way to squeak out the 8th as a launch day with some creative timelining, basically closing hatches and being ready to undock right away in the morning. But we're not going there yet, and obviously we don't need to talk about that for a long time, hopefully never, and when we launch on time here on Wednesday. So just to let you know, if we do scrub, we'll be looking at maybe squeezing out one more day. Again, we got to talk about range issues and all that stuff, but right now still everything's clear and in great shape. And that's all I had for you this morning. Mike?
Okay, well, thanks. Well, I don't have a lot to report this morning. We got into the countdown yesterday on time. We should be into PRSD load. That's the load of the liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen for the fuel cells. That should be going on, should be picking up right now as I speak. We'll be doing our standard rest of the countdown with RSS retract about 7 o'clock tomorrow evening.
and looking for the opening of the window at 3:47 Wednesday afternoon with a preferred launch time of 3:52, plus or minus a few seconds, and of course we'll adjust that real time on launch day with the flight director out of Houston. Right now we're not tracking any issues at all that would prevent launch or really bothering us at all. There are a couple little nits out there, but it's very, very typical kind of issues for this point in the countdown. Nothing that's going to hold us up at all, really. Mike mentioned the scrub turnaround options. We have 4 attempts in 5 days, which history says we should have a good high 90% kind of time percentile of getting off the pad with those 4 attempts in 5 days. So everything's going really, really well. We recovered from our problems over the weekend and in fine shape. I went through the fire room this morning. The team is in great spirits. They're looking forward to launching Discovery for the final time and getting her on to a great mission. And that's all I have. Kathy?
Well, the weather has been very nice here the last few days in the Central Florida area. We are expecting, though, a bit of a transition as we get into midweek. On launch day, we should start seeing more moisture migrate into the area. With that, we always have some concerns for some low cloud ceilings and also a chance for some isolated showers in the area. So we do have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. Now, if we happen to delay 24 hours, then the weather gets a little more difficult. We do have a front that's expected to move through the area, dragging an upper level low that's going to be sitting off in the western Gulf of Mexico over Florida. And then we expect much more chance for showers, low cloud ceilings, and even a chance for an isolated thunderstorm in the area on Thursday. So with that, on Thursday, we have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. On Friday, the front will push through, and then we'll have some strong winds behind it, and due to the threat of a violation of winds at the launch pad and also a low cloud ceiling, if we happen to delay 48 hours, then we may end up we also have a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch just due to the post-frontal weather. The TAL sites look good on launch day. All 3 sites are forecast go. And also on day 2 as well, except for just Zaragoza has a slight chance for some fog, both on if we happen to delay 24 hours and also 48 hours. So overall, TAL sites are looking good. I do want to show the satellite picture so I can show you Tropical Storm Tomas that is down in the Caribbean, become more disorganized over the last 24 hours as it's been under a lot of shear. It is expected, though, to become in a less shear environment, if you will, get into a better environment and possibly redevelop. But it's not going to be an issue for us here in Florida or for the SRB recovery area for the next 5 to 7 days. Beyond that, one of the models is trying to linger it down there in the Caribbean as opposed to making a northeast move like most of the models are doing. So we'll just keep watching it, but so far looking good. Now the SRB recovery area looks good for launch day, just 5 to 6 foot seas, but if as they remain out there for a couple more days, we do expect the seas to pick up to 8 to 11 feet by Friday out in that area. So it is going to be a bit bumpy for them for SRB recovery. But overall, it looks like Wednesday's kind of the transition day. That's the best day for us to go out of the 3 days that we're talking about. So hopefully we go on that day. 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch.
Thank you. We'll now take questions. When the microphone comes your way, please state your name, affiliation, and to whom you're addressing your question. We'll start over here with Bill.
Bill Hart with CBS for Mike Leinbach. You know, all orbiters, I mean, they used to joke that Columbia, had a lot of trouble getting to the pad, but once it got there, everything was great. Does Discovery have a personality to you as you go into this last flow in terms of how it's behaved over the years, or any thoughts you have about making this last launch?
No, Discovery's been a fine ship. We have kidded a couple times in the past about getting Columbia on orbit, but that was only because we loved her too. The teams themselves are a bit different. They have different personality in the processing teams. I think I've talked to you about that before. And so the teams are bringing a little bit different atmosphere to their integrated scheduling meetings or their meetings over in the orbiter processing facility. Discovery herself is a fine ship. She's ready to go. Just hate to see her retire so early in her life, that's all.
Marcia.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press, for Mike Moses. If Thursday's forecast is so bad, and I missed that percentage, I think you...
Mike dropped me a letter here telling me I said 30. I think it's 60% chance for violating constraints.
Okay. If that remains the case on Wednesday and you don't go Wednesday for weather or something else minor, would you just skip Thursday and try for Friday given the bad forecast, or do you think you just... What's the thinking right now?
Well, the good news is if that happens, we'll be just 24 hours out from that forecast, have a much better definition of what it really is, what the violations really are. But given the the PRS deloading that Mike was talking about with our scrub turnaround having 4 attempts in 5 days, it may or may not buy us something to hop over that day. Right now, I wouldn't make that decision ahead of time. We'll just wait till we get there.
And for either of the two mics, is there any sadness that you detect in the hallways? I mean, it's exciting going into a launch, but this is the last launch for Discovery, and I'm just wondering what you see as the mood of the people that you just see walking up and down the hallways.
Well, see, I'll take it first. You know, I think I talked to you last time in a press conference about there's still a certain amount of disbelief that that it's really her final launch. We all know it. You know, we've come to grips with that fact, but it's hard to believe after having Discovery and the rest of the fleet for 30 years flying so well for America to bring it to an end. So it's difficult to accept emotionally, but rationally we all know it's coming to an end and we need to get on with it. We'll finish this mission and then put Discovery in the transition retirement phase and start safing her and getting her ready for ultimate disposition. Some museum somewhere. I'm not quite sure where it's going.
Irene Klotz with Reuters. Kathy, could you just go through the no-goes for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Because I think, thanks.
Right. Okay. on Wednesday, there's a 30% chance of case of weather prohibiting launch. Thursday is the day the front moves through, and that's the 60% chance. And then on Friday, we're back to a 30% chance.
No, you said that wrong. It's only 5% each day. Right?
That's right.
At least in my dreams.
It's 50-50 every day.
It's 50-50 every day.
Okay. Robert.
Hi, Robert Perlman with CollectSpace.com for Mike Leinbach. I know your own history goes back with the agency to 1984. Do you have any distinct memories about watching Discovery fly for the first time? And are there any members who are going to be in the firing room who were on console for that first launch?
Second part of your question, the answer is yes. We've had there are members of the launch team that have been around since STS-1, and so we will do something to recognize them. My own personal recollections, when I was a test director, the NASA test director of the launch NTD, STS-133R was my first mission with Discovery, a Department of Defense mission with Fred Gregory as the commander. So I have a lot of memories of Discovery, of course, as we all do, and it goes back quite some time. It's going to be hard to see her end, but we're looking forward to a great mission and seeing her on the runway and greeting the crew when they get back, as we always do.
In the back, please.
Gina Sinceri, ABC News. Have you given any thought to how you'll say Godspeed to Discovery when it launches? Is anyone giving you any advice?
I'm not good at taking advice, so that goes with the job. That's one of the qualifications for the job, is you're not good at taking advice, which is actually the opposite. No, I haven't thought of that yet, but I'm sure something will come to me driving in Wednesday morning.
Ken?
Hi, Ken Kramer for Spaceflight Magazine for Mike Leinbach. I wonder if you could tell us a little stories about the actual people who are preparing Discovery for the final time.
Stories of the people. Gosh, thousands and thousands of stories out there. Oh, man. There are so many stories and so many parties and so many recollections. I'd hate to single out just a few. I would like to point out two people that deserve a lot of credit for processing Discovery in the last phase of her career, which is Stephanie Stilson, the NASA flow director, and Wayne Bingham, the flow manager for the United Space Alliance. Those two folks have really led their team in an outstanding manner, kept them together in the face of adversity, have processed the ship just extremely well. And all the credit for a great mission from a hardware perspective goes to those two individuals and obviously the folks that work for them.
Todd.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today for either of the mics. You know, I'm wondering if you can just reflect for us on the retirement of the shuttle fleet and what your thoughts are about the wisdom of doing that at a time where we don't have a replacement ship yet.
Let's see, Mike's been talking for a while, so I'll attempt that one. You sure you don't want to ask about the weather? let's see, ideal world, yeah, obviously you'd want to be able to, before you sell your current car and go buy a new one, you want to make sure you got, the next one to buy, or same thing with the house or anything. You'd like to have the next thing ready to jump right into. So from that standpoint, it's a little different. But the realities are that NASA is on a fixed budget, just like most American families, and without a big infusion of cash, we can only do a couple of things at a time. With all our aeronautics and science research, with the human spaceflight programs, and all the other work that's going on, you kind of have to share it amongst the family. And so to get another human spaceflight program started, we have to shut one down. Ideally, yeah, I'd love to have the cash to be able to do that together. And so from a wisdom standpoint's not the right word, because we're talking politics, and there's not always a lot of wisdom that goes into political decisions, but the realities are there. So yeah, there's a little bit of, I wish we could do this differently, but then again, if this is what it is, we're going to make the best of it. We're going to take this shuttle team here that does an amazing job processing vehicles, does an amazing job operating and flying a spacecraft, and go apply them to the team that's off developing the new program, and we're going to make that one a successful human spaceflight program as well.
And
I might just add just a little bit. I've shared this with a couple folks privately, and one thing you learn in our business is redundancy is not only good, in some situations it's mandatory. When the shuttle stops flying, we will have a grand total of one way to get to the space station. And our Russian partners are outstanding partners, very, very reliable, don't get me wrong. They're outstanding partners, and they'll do a terrific job. But you have redundancy for a reason, and without the shuttle, we lose that redundancy. And so, from an engineering perspective, it's not an emotional thing. It's an engineering shortfall that we won't have redundancy in getting astronauts to orbit.
And just a quick follow for either of you, Mikes. What are your thoughts about handing over the responsibility for flying U.S. astronauts into low Earth orbit to commercial companies rather than NASA doing that job?
A lot of that is going to go into the details of how those contracts are written, what oversight is there. You look at the model right now for all our science missions, and I'm not trying to equate a Mars orbiter to an astronaut flying to the station, but we effectively do that there. We contract that launch vehicle, and they provide services, but we still have a NASA insight and oversight team, all the way down to having a NASA launch director on those missions that is providing a level of redundancy. I could envision a similar model, but again, the details of how you go write those contracts and the model of operation will dictate the end outcome. You got to be careful, right? Because there's the reason to do commercial spaceflight, which is exactly what NASA's purpose is, which is to promote technology development, seed the marketplace, to get everybody out there doing spaceflight, and to get the human race into orbit, basically. That's our ultimate future and our ultimate goal. But you got to be careful. There's a lot of, Mike talks about redundancy. That's a great thing. People tend to throw at us that we're a big bureaucracy and we have a lot of paperwork and a lot of redundancy. We have it because we need it, because we fly perfectly. We do our best to fly perfectly. I'm not saying that commercial companies won't do it, but it's a lot easier before you start flying to show that maybe you don't need so much redundancy and bureaucracy and paperwork. And just this afternoon, I'm going to go hear a waiver on a piece of paper that says that we're not violating any constraints on an antenna in the SRB, because the number says it's 14 days before launch. And when we wrote the requirement, we didn't count for scrubs before we actually started SU-7. So here we delayed 2 days, and so I'm going to break my requirement. But if I would have started the countdown and delayed 2 days, I wouldn't have any paper to take. So yeah, we have a fair bit of paperwork that you really wish you didn't have to deal with. And it really kind of makes no sense some days why you have some of that paperwork. But the system overall really drives you to a system of safety. And it's all driven towards that. When we talked about that with the work that was going on this weekend at the pad, it's sometimes frustrating that you're waiting on the paperwork. The engineers who are going to go turn the wrenches and replace those leaky QDs wrote what they're going to go do, but they can't do it until the paper comes back to them blessed and signed and checked by quality. And you really need that step, because you never know when you're going to miss something, and that one little bolt, that one little fitting, that one little piece of plastic tubing could be the loss of the mission that day. And so we do want to make sure we're careful. I've gone off track a little bit from what you were talking about with commercial crew, but I think as long as you set it up right and you set the right architecture, the right framework, the right insight and oversight, there's no reason you couldn't be just as safe and successful with a commercial provider.
Bill.
Just a quick question for Kathy. Yesterday you said that you were indicating there might be a change in the weather, whatever. Is this an optimistic forecast today, or is there any trends out there that might turn this around tomorrow the other way?
Well, it all depends on the location of the upper level low in Texas. There are some differences on the models in those. So the closer that upper level low is to Florida, the more moisture, the more dynamics, the more chance of getting some showers in the area and a low cloud ceiling. So it's going to depend on where that drops. And so that's where 30% is covering. But we are noting that, it is a transition day, and every model run looks a little different. It shuffles when that moisture comes in, but Wednesday is definitely the transition day.
Denise Chow, space.com. How has the launch delays affected the crew's pre-launch activities and schedule? Have the extra days just given them more time for training, or what have they been up to?
Yeah, they basically filled in some training. If you were out there a little earlier, you heard the STA flying over the Shuttle training aircraft, which is the aircraft the astronauts used to simulate shuttle landings. They were flying approaches up at the SLF, the Shuttle Landing Facility. Today's their last scheduled training run. They have another one on the books tomorrow if they want it, but we'll have to wait and see what Commander Lindsay feels like. But yeah, they basically backfill some training and then kind of take a little bit of downtime. They've been pushing pretty hard to get here. Knowing how crews respond, they usually get into crew quarters. They immediately attack their books, study their procedures. They're at the business end of the mission, and they know they need to do it exactly right. And the more prep work they can do, the better. I think in some ways they appreciate having an extra day to study a little more, but at their own pace now. It's not somebody else driving their schedule, so you can kind of relax a little bit. But I know they're anxious to go, and we're anxious to get them out to the pad and launched.
Irene.
Thanks. Mike Moses, I think this is for you since you stuck your toe in the political waters. I know NASA tries to stay above politics, yet the political reality is the foundation which the space program operates. And in light of the fact that it seems that there's another pretty strong political shift that may take place tomorrow on Election Day, do you have any concerns or any thoughts about how that might impact NASA at all?
When I started in the shuttle program back a while back, the programs were there and moving along. The station program was there and moving along, although at the time when I started, it was still there were quite a few years where only one vote made station live in Congress. So, but there was always the shuttle program that kind of isolated you from the roller coaster up and downs as you went through changes in congressional leadership. Administration leadership in the White House can sometimes change direction, but the vision for the space program has kind of been moving forward. We've hit a transition time right now, and just because we're in transition, you feel those political waves a lot more than you would have a few years ago. So, I don't think anything's different these days than it was at the last midterm elections, or wind back a couple more years, 4 or 8 years. I think this has always been there. That turmoil has always been there. It's just that because as an agency we're at a crossroads transition point right now, you're just feeling the ripples a little more. So yeah, there's going to be some changes, I think, coming out of the elections. Maybe not, who knows? And does that mean a change of direction for NASA? Maybe, who knows? But at the end of the day, we're the agents of the government, and we follow the orders both in terms of the authorization and the direction that the president sets, and then the funding that Congress provides for it. So we'll just wait and see if that mission changes, and we'll react accordingly.
Marcia.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press for Mike Leinbach. Are you anticipating lots of parties post-launch, or are you encouraging people to wait until we'll stop? I'm just wondering when the big festivities really kick in.
There's a whole team set up to recognize the employees and do different things for them. And I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I don't know when the final party for Discovery is. I've been kind of busy over the last couple of weeks. I'm sure there will be one. It'll probably be at our recreation center here on base. I'm certain it'll be after we'll stop, so we can all celebrate a successful mission. And there'll be a lot of hugging, a lot of patting on the back, I'm sure. I don't know when it is. I really don't. I'm looking forward to it, though.
Ken.
Hi, Ken Kramer for Spaceflight Magazine for Mike Leinbach and Mike Moses. Mike, you mentioned that Discovery is a great ship, has a lot of life left in her. Could you estimate somehow how many missions or years you think that could be?
Oh boy. Well, all orbiters were designed for 100 mission life. The time was not as long as we've been flying them, but they were designed for 100 missions each. So in some respects, she's just in her early 30s, late 30s, something like that. Like the B-52, I mean the B-52 is still flying. We upgrade the orbiters. They're in fine shape. To most people's view, they're the best they've ever been. They're the safest they've ever been. Could we keep on flying them? I believe we could, but that's not the direction we've been given, and so we need to get on with the direction. We may not like it, but that's the direction we've been given, and so we'll get on with retiring these ships and moving into the next program.
Kind of sounds like you think she could go another 10 years, maybe? Longer?
I think with proper care and feeding, it's a machine, after all, and machines, as long as you take care of them, they'll be good to you too.
Are there any further questions? Todd.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today for either Mike. I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a picture of what things are going to look like here in regard to the development of a heavy lift launch vehicle. The Congress has authorized you guys to move ahead with the development, and do you have any idea of what the regime of test flights might look like, and what's going to be going on here at the Kennedy Space Center in regard to heavy lift for the next 5 years?
Let's see, Todd. So the authorization language talks about a heavy lift vehicle, the Space Launch System. Obviously, there's going to need to be infrastructure changes here at Kennedy to support that. But anything that looks like a test flight or a schedule like that is really up in the air. We don't have the appropriations yet to know how much money's coming. We assume, based on last levels, what we would get. Also, the appropriations bill can have a lot of splits dictating earmarks that go to certain centers that have to have a split. All that can factor in to say how much money we're going to spend here at Kennedy Space Center on infrastructure upgrades. All I can say is we are definitely, if we're developing a heavy lift vehicle, obviously the launch pads, the processing facilities are all going to have to be modified or built new to accommodate that. And so that work's going on. There's a whole team of folks here at Kennedy who are off looking at that and laying it out. But it's still a little bit in limbo because we haven't yet picked an architecture, the size of the vehicle, fuel that it would carry, upper stage size, all that stuff kind of dictates what you're going to do. It's pretty basic to say we're probably going to be processing in the VAB. We're going to be using Launch Complex 39. And other than that, all the cards are on the table to trade it out. So I don't have any specifics.
Well, and just to lay something out for you, Pad B is being raised down to the concrete, so it's more adaptable to any type vehicle. Pad A, we're going to leave it alone just in case after the final mission, we're going to leave it alone for some time in case the heavy lift vehicle is shuttle derived. Then we'd be able to adapt it much more easily than if we'd already demolished the thing. So we're going to leave Pad A alone until we know what the design is. As Mike says, the design of the infrastructure is dictated by the design of the rocket, not the other way. And so we're going to leave Pad A alone, betting on the come that it'll be shuttle derived. If it's not, well, then we'll react to those changes when it happens.
Okay, we'll take our last question over here, please.
Yeah, James Spahn with Nico Doga. Two quick questions for Mike Moses and Mike Lineback. After a successful mission, what's the process, length of and type of process to actually retire the ship, Discovery? And maybe from Mike Lineback, what do you want that plaque to say when she finds her final home in a museum?
Let's see, once Discovery's back, it'll follow about a 30-day-ish plan that's just the normal plan as if it was coming back and being turned around again. We call that down mission processing, where it gets back into the OPF. We safe the critical systems, get the payload infrastructure out that's mission-specific, take that out of the payload bay, basically deconfigure its specific mission configuration. And then it'll move into a phase that we're calling TNR, transition and retirement, where we move to a set of safing steps where like the fuel systems and the hydraulic systems are drained and decontaminated, and basically the ship is then prepared for its display state, and then be ready. That process is going to take, I forget what the timeline shows, but it's on the order of 6 to 8 months ish I think end to end. It's fairly flexible because we don't yet know. We know what we're calling it the end state, so we know what condition to put the major systems, but we don't know the display state because we haven't gotten the request from the, Discovery hasn't been assigned necessarily to a specific museum. They haven't told us what configuration they would like it to be in, what hardware they would or would not like included. All that has to be negotiated. So that's an ongoing process, but we're looking at 6 to 8 months worth of processing for Discovery before it's ready to go.
Well, and I think to the question about the display itself, I would like to see some adaptation of the tribute that the Discovery team put together, the one you see over in the press dome there, with all the patches and the orbiter doing the reverse pitch maneuver. The team that works on Discovery and loves Discovery the most, designed that tribute, and so I think that'd be very appropriate to have with her wherever she ends up.
That will conclude today's pre-launch news conference. Please join us on NASA television today at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for the International Space Station Science Briefing. For more information on the STS-133 mission and its crew, visit www.nasa.gov/shuttle. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for the L-1 countdown status briefing for Space Shuttle Discovery's STS-133 mission to the International Space Station. Joining me today is Steve Payne, NASA Test Director.
Good morning.
Scott Higginbotham, STS-133 Payload Manager.
Good morning.
And Kathy Winters, Shuttle Weather Officer.
Good morning.
We'll hear from our panelists and then we'll take questions. Steve.
Thank you. Next to the launch itself, this is the part I like best. We're in launch countdown within a day of launch. There's a lot of excitement in the air. Everyone's putting on their game face and getting ready for the launch tomorrow. The launch team's been preparing Discovery for her 39th and final flight. That's going to be putting a permanent multipurpose module and the Express Logistics carrier up at the International Space Station. After addressing a couple of issues last night and this morning, our countdown work is currently on schedule, or back on schedule. We had a good reactant load and offload last night. That's enough hold time to take us through the end of our window without having to top off, which is a good thing. Last night we had a couple of issues. We had to go repair a faulty regulator on our launch pad nitrogen purge system. It has a primary and a secondary leg to it. They're redundant systems. The primary side had a bad regulator. So we finished our load, our reactant load, as we intended to, and in the time after that we went and repaired our primary side. And it's back up and supporting. It's in launch configuration now. It's good to go. We also had a little excitement early this morning when we were doing our engine checkouts. We brought up our engine controllers. When we got to our engine 3 backup engine controller, it didn't come up as we had expected. Apparently there was something wrong with one of the 3 phases that provide power to it. After doing some troubleshooting, we narrowed it down to either the circuit breaker or switch that provides it power. We did some troubleshooting. We cycled the breaker and we cycled the switch. We kind of narrowed it down to transient contamination. Once in a while you get that when you push a switch and it doesn't go. After cycling the switch and the breaker a few times, it cleared up. The controllers powered up normally. We did the checkout and they are now back up and supporting. We just recently completed the engine checkout, so they're back up and running, and they should be that way all the way through T0. They're still talking about final disposition, so the paperwork isn't closed, but I think we're going to be okay on that one as well. Currently, the countdown clock is holding at T-minus 11 hours. We're working preps for the checkout for the orbital ground communications network, and that should start this afternoon at 1:30. We're doing our final flight crew equipment stow this afternoon at 3, and that's where they put in the late experiments and food and other things that are perishable and last minute. We'll be performing a number of final inspections of the tank, the boosters and thrusters, and removing access platforms of various kinds in preparation for rotating the rotating service structure this evening. At 7 p.m. tonight, we're going to be taking the rotating service structure back, and we'll begin final crew module configuration for load. At 11:30 tonight, we'll pick up the clock again and resume at count at T-minus 11 hours, and then we'll begin final loading preparations and begin clearing the pad at about 1:30 in the morning tomorrow. At that time, we'll begin purging the mid-body and aft compartment and forward and aft reaction control systems with nitrogen and work final preparations for tanking. Our earliest tanking time is scheduled for 6:27 in the morning tomorrow. It should take us about 3 hours to get the tank filled. Our flight crew is scheduled to arrive just before 1 p.m. on Wednesday. Launch window remains the same. It's a 10-minute window for station flights. We have opportunities for a Flight Day 3 and Flight Day 4 rendezvous, which adds about another 3 minutes to that. Typically, we pick the middle of the window, so we'll go about 5 minutes into it. We're expecting somewhere around 3:47 for window open and about 5 minutes later for middle of the window. Let's see. We have through the 7th of November to get off the ground. That gives us plenty of opportunities to have our 4 attempts in 5 days scenario, which is our standard. Plenty of hold time, so it's not a concern there. It's an 11-day mission with 1 contingency day for mission extension should we need it, and 2 weather contingency days in case we need those as well. Our end of mission landing is planned for a Sunday, November 14th at 9:59 Eastern Time. Right now, it's, I'm sure you've heard a great deal about Discovery and her history and her long and distinguished career, but I'd also like to comment on the remarkable team that gets her ready to fly. They put their heart and soul into this one, and they know it's their last flight, and they put everything they can to make it as good as every other flight we've had in the past. She's now poised to take to the skies tomorrow, and when she goes, she's going to take a little bit of every one of us with her, and we're ready.
Thank you, Steve. Scott.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to start this morning with a little video compilation of the processing campaign for both the Permanent Multipurpose Module and Express Logistics Carrier 4. The work for those 2 elements took place over the span of about 13 months, but we're going to compress it down into about 4.5 minutes, so I'm going to try to talk fast. And it does bounce around from element to element, so along the way I'll try to keep it straight for you. This is the arrival of ELC-4. It came in via Air Force C-5 back on August 15th of last year. Flew down from the Goddard Space Flight Center where the fine people there under Kevin Carmack put this and the other ELCs together for us to go fly. This is the module FM-1 Leonardo that returned on the STS-131 mission, and we got it back into our work stand on the 26th of April of this year and began the process to turn it into a PMM. This is some views of the deintegration of the cargo that took place for a couple of weeks before we actually started the modifications of the element to convert it. This is a view of our common berthing mechanism checkout equipment that we lift up to simulate the station side of the docking interface, and this took place back in mid-May of this year, and we do that to make sure that all those mechanisms are going to work right and seal appropriately once we do dock the element to the station. The work to modify the element primarily took place in May and in June and July. This is a lift of ELC-4 over to the rotation stand, one of many times that we flipped it 180 degrees so that we could work on the top side or the bottom side. We started installing racks after the mods were complete into the PMM. The first rack went in on the 7th of July, and the last rack went in on the 22nd of July. We have 14 racks flying up with us inside the vehicle. Our Thales Alenia Space friends working for Roberto Barreto and that great team, they did a lot of the mods on the vehicle, and there they were installing some of the Nextel Kevlar shielding on the vehicle. On the 22nd of July, we installed the thermal radiator, the big honkin' radiator, as some of us call it, on top of VLC-4. It's the one and only ORU that we're flying up on this mission because of mass property limitations. On the bottom side of the deck, there are 5 sites for future payloads and ORUs to be installed, 2 of which are launching on HTV-2 in January. This is a scene of the mate of the deck to its keel. That took place on 4th of August of this year. And that keel comes home. It's the only piece of this complement for the 2 major elements that comes home. Robonaut 2, our favorite robot astronaut, he is flying up with us on this mission. He arrived in early August and spent about 10 days being prepared for installation into its protective enclosure, which is called Sleeper. And ultimately that enclosure was installed in the module as the last major big thing that we put on board. The module was lifted on the 5th of October and weighed one last time before it went into the transportation canister, where it joined up with ELC-4 that was installed back in late September. It was done a little bit earlier. And then once both elements were in the canister, the doors were closed up, and we left the SSPF and went down to our canister rotation facility, where the canister is picked up on end and set back down onto the transporter for the ride to the pad. The canister rolled out to Pad A on the 7th of October of this year, my 21st wedding anniversary. My wife's here in the audience. And rolled out to the pad, arriving in the early morning hours, where it was then hoisted up into the rotating service structure, and then the payload elements were transferred into the payload ground handling mechanism, which is in the payload changeout room that's part of that rotating service structure. That whole rotating service structure then comes back around the orbiter. We open up the doors and we insert the payload elements into the orbiter, make all the necessary mechanical and electrical connections, test those interfaces, and then do our final closeouts. And then on the 16th of October, it all came to a conclusion when we closed the payload bay doors for flight. It was a very bittersweet moment for me and my team. I wouldn't have missed it, though, for the world. It was neat to kiss Leonardo goodbye. And that brings us basically up to where we stand today. The two primary elements in the payload bay are ready to go fly, and they are quite content to set as long as is necessary to get Discovery on orbit where it belongs. We have no scrub turnaround considerations for either of the two primary elements. For the mid-deck complement, we have quite a few items that we're flying up in the mid-deck research-wise. And the major push to get all those installed in the vehicle will happen today, starting at noon and running till about 7 p.m. tonight. We have 9 different things that we're installing into the vehicle. As far as scrub turnarounds is concerned for the experiments, they run the full spectrum. We have one item that has to be swapped out after every launch attempt, and we have another item that's good for 30 days and everything in between. So our team has a lot of different plans in place, and we're prepared for whatever the weather or the vehicle throws at us. We'll be prepared to go get the samples freshened and ready to go fly to maximize our science return. So at this point, we're about ready to go put the ULF-5 complement into space and add this amazing pressurized vehicle to the station. It's been part of our family here for a long time. Leonardo's been here for over 10 years, and in some respects we're sad to see him go because, again, he's an old friend of ours. But spacecraft belong in space, not on the ground, and this is a fitting place for him to end his career. Over the 7 flights that Leonardo has flown so far, it has been in space for about 91 days. It's made 1,500 orbits of the Earth, and has traveled about 40 million miles. But as far as used spacecraft go, it's a cream puff. It's still got a lot of good miles left in it, and in fact, if we leave it up there for the full 10 years planned, we're going to put another 1.5 billion miles on that spacecraft. So our team's excited. We're looking forward to the launch and seeing our fine hardware added to the station, and then we can move on to the next chapter in our lives. So that's all I have for you today. Kendria?
Thank you, Scott. Kathy?
Well, good morning. Well, the weather this morning is a little bit cloudy out there here at KSC. We also had some isolated showers in the area this morning. This is all a result of an upper level low that's dipping down into Texas and drawing a lot of moisture back up into our area. And we kind of expected to see some isolated showers start to occur, and that did start happening today. That is our concern again for tomorrow, is that we could have some showers in the area and also a low cloud ceiling. But a lot of that moisture is going to pull to the north. We still have a very moist atmosphere, though. And so with that, we do expect that it's possible during the countdown tomorrow that we may have to go red for a low cloud ceiling or an isolated shower, or maybe observe no-go for a little while in the early portion of the afternoon, late portion of the morning, early afternoon, as the showers push inland with the sea breeze. But then we expect that conditions will improve as we get closer to launch time. We had something similar like that happen yesterday with our low cloud ceiling in the area as we got into the afternoon hours. The sea breeze pushed in, and we get some sinking air behind that sea breeze, and it helps us out here along the coast. And so tomorrow we'll see something similar like that happen, and so with that we are optimistic on the forecast, even though we know that it's possible we could go red during the countdown. Right now we are still forecasting a 30% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. Now, if we get into a delay, though, you'll see the forecast. It looks a lot worse, as if that entire frontal system is going to be coming across our area. What's happening is an upper-level trough is dipping down from the north into the eastern U.S. That's going to pick up that cutoff low that's going to be sort of drifting in the western Gulf of Mexico, and all that is going to march over Florida. So we'll finally get some much-needed rain on Thursday, but it will deteriorate our launch forecast, and with that we have a 70% chance on Thursday of KSC weather prohibiting launch. Let me go ahead and show you all this on the satellite picture. When you look at the satellite picture, you can see that upper level low is dipping down into Texas. The weather at the surface is all on the east side of that low. And so with that, you can see our friends in Houston did wake up to some thunderstorm activity this morning. And all of that is going to be lingering out in that area for the next 24 hours as that low cuts off and the upper levels out in that area and drifts into the western Gulf of Mexico. With that, though, we will be expecting moisture to pull up into our area. Also to note is Tropical Storm Tomas that's down in the Caribbean about 250 miles south of the island of Hispaniola. That's continuing to be forecast to march towards the west and then make a turn northeast. And unfortunately, it's probably going to give Haiti some trouble here as we get it to the end of the week. Let me show you a closer picture of our satellite here in the local area, a good visible satellite picture. You can see a lot of clouds in the area here in Florida right now. Basically, an old frontal boundary is migrating back north through the area today, with bringing all that moisture, and we'll get on the moist side of this boundary after it moves to the north. But we do expect the conditions to look a little bit better tomorrow than what this looks like right now. And then, of course, through the mid-morning, then we'd expect to see some clouds kind of accumulate as the sea breeze first forms, and then as that all migrates inland, we expect the coast to start improving as we get in the afternoon towards launch time. So let's go ahead and before we go on to our launch forecast information, let me show you the Hurricane Center's forecast for Tomas. You can see that right turn that is expected at the end of the week. And now the models differ a little bit on the last 4 to 5 days for Tomas, but still not a threat to Florida. Mainly the threat is to Haiti if the storm starts lingering in that area. Some of the models pull it out to the northeast, away into the Atlantic, and then there's a couple of them that are starting to linger it in the area of Haiti, which would be unfortunate for them because of the amount of rainfall that they could experience there in the entire island of Hispaniola. So that'll be a concern for them. But for us, this is not a threat, and it's still not a threat also for the SRB recovery area. So let's go ahead and move to our tanking forecast for tomorrow. Weather does look like we'll probably see some more of those isolated showers in the area for tanking, but that's not a constraint for tanking. And so overall weather looks very good. Will be pretty humid tomorrow, and the temperature will be around 74 degrees. The probability of violating tanking constraints, I did go with a 10% chance there. The atmosphere is just starting to trend more unstable, but it's not likely we'd see any lightning in the morning. But I did just increase that number from 5 to 10% due to just that unstable atmosphere that's starting to occur. But we expect that to really come more into the following 24 hours. Let's go ahead and go to our launch forecast. You can see there's a chance for some isolated showers still. I expect that they'd mostly be off to the west and inland. Question mark will be if those are going to be within 20 nautical miles of the shuttle landing facility. If so, then that would be an RTLS violation for the shuttle landing facility. Also, we're just slightly concerned that cloud deck at 3,000 feet. We know we'll probably see a ceiling in the early portion of the afternoon. As we get closer to launch time, that should improve and scatter out. But for those concerns, we do have a 30% chance of KSE weather prohibiting launch. For SRB recovery, the weather is not bad at all on launch day, just some isolated showers expected in the area. The seas are going to be 5 to 6 feet. However, over the next several days, the trend is going to be that the seas are going to be on the increase. First of all, with that weather system that moves through on Thursday, and then particularly on Friday, the seas will pick up as that strong wind comes in behind the frontal boundary. So the main concern is just that while they're out there recovering, they're going to be dealing with a lot of weather, and then on Friday, the seas will be increasing to 8 to 11 feet. Spaceflight Meteorology Group is forecasting good conditions at our abort landing sites here in the U.S. And for our TAL sites, the weather still looks very good out there at all 3 TAL sites for launch day. If we do happen to delay 24 hours, things change quite a bit here. That front comes in the area that we talked about, that low comes across. We could get up to an inch of rain in the central Florida area here on the East Coast. And so with the potential for showers in the area and even potential for thunderstorms in the area, as well as low cloud ceilings, we do have a 70% chance on this day of KSE weather prohibiting launch. The abort landing sites, though, in the U.S. still do look good at both Edwards and at Northrop Field. And the only concern Spaceflight Meteorology Group has at the TAL sites is for a chance of 4 miles visibility in fog at Zaragoza. But we only need 1 good TAL site, and Marone and Istris both look good. For the 48-hour delay, we expect that the frontal boundary will move through sometime either Thursday night or Friday morning. It'll pass completely through the area with some lingering cloud cover behind it. But that will also eventually clear. The bigger concern is the winds picking up on this day. From the direction of 340 degrees, the pad wind constraint is 34 knots. But if it happens to be a little bit more northerly, it starts to decrease. And from straight north, it's actually down to 23 knots. So that's our only concern, our main concern on this day. There's just a slight concern also for a low cloud ceiling during this time in case that boundary moves through a little bit slower than the models are forecasting. So overall, we have a 30% chance of KSE weather prohibiting launch. I will note the upper level winds do get very strong on this day, so sometimes when we have strong jet streams come in, that can cause a concern for our folks at Ascent, at JSC, and Marshall that will be working the upper level winds. But right now, this number does not cover that probability. If we do happen to use the abort landing sites at Edwards and Northrop Field, the weather does look good. And for the TAL sites, again, just a concern is Zaragoza for visibility coming down with fog. So overall, tomorrow looks like a good day, especially when you compare it to Thursday. But tomorrow we have a 30% chance of KSE weather prohibiting launch. Andrew?
Thank you, Kathy. We'll now take your questions. When the microphone comes your way, please state your name, affiliation, and to whom you're addressing your question. We can start over here with Bill.
Bill Harwood, CBS. For Steve, on that controller thing, that's just a paperwork constraint now? There are no constraints to press them with any of the mech power-ups and stuff that are normally
No,
associated
the rest
with
of the
that?
count is proceeding normally. The engineering is still figuring out how they want to close the paperwork and what, if anything, we need to do further.
But you don't think this one's going to be an issue for us?
I don't expect it
Okay,
will.
thanks.
Okay, in the second row with Todd, please.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today for Scott. Do you happen to have upmass and downmass totals for Leonardo over its 7 missions? And I have a follow.
Not over the 7 missions, although we could go obtain that. I meant to gather that, but I didn't. Sorry. I do know we're taking up about 6,500 pounds up on this flight of cargo. The module weighs 21,817 pounds as launched on this mission. But over its lifetime, this is a fairly light load for an MPLM because of our mass limitations and CG limitations. So, it normally flies with 7,000 to 8,000 pounds of cargo up per flight.
And just to follow, do you know or can you tell us what the final disposition of the other MPLMs will be? What's going to happen with Raffaello and Donatello?
Well, for now, we're going to hold on to them because there is some talk about potentially flying them on unmanned rockets in the future and maybe as another permanent module to add to the station. So they're good vehicles. They've got a lot of lifetime left in them, and so for now, I think the intent is to hold on to them and see if an opportunity arises.
Just to follow that quickly, do you know what unmanned rockets they would be compatible with?
No, I really don't off the top of my head, Todd.
Okay.
Marcia?
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press. First question for Kathy. Just for kicks, what does the Saturday and Sunday weather look like?
Well, we still are a bit breezy on Saturday with the winds turning even a little bit more northerly, and so we'll be watching that because from a northerly direction, if the winds are strong, then that would drop that pad wind constraint down to 23 knots. And then if the high continues to move off, then you start running into crosswind issues. So the winds are still going to be probably the biggest concern as we get into Saturday and Sunday, eventually tapering off, though, and improving weather conditions probably by maybe Sunday afternoon and into Monday. So it'll be trending down during that time.
Scott, you say there are load limitations with only the radiator on that cargo carrier. Could you explain that a little more, why more equipment couldn't have been loaded on that?
Okay. Well, there's 2 things we have to deal with on every flight. The vehicle itself, based on its performance, flying to the inclination orbit that we're flying to and the altitude we're flying to, has a limit to how much mass it can carry up. And then furthermore, we have to keep the vehicle within certain center of gravity limits so that it can safely fly back in the event of an emergency or for a nominal landing. And so when you look at both of those things, it limits you as to what you can fly. And there's a team in Houston that does very, very thorough analysis looking at mission complements and coming up with the best way to get the most bang for our buck, so to speak, and how we lay out that cargo. And several months ago, actually it would have been well over a year ago, there was an assessment done to look at some different configurations for these last few flights, and the best scenario they could come up with over those few flights was to fly this module and this deck and this configuration loaded out as they are And even though they're not completely full, either one, it's the best that we could do under the circumstances and stay within the orbiter's performance limits.
Ken, here down on the end.
Hi, Ken Kramer for Spaceflight Magazine for Scott. Can you please describe a little more detail the 9 items you'll be putting on today?
Well, let's see. We have a glacier, which is a fridge freezer that we're going to install, and in that fridge freezer we're going to be installing a JAXA experiment called C-SPINS, and that is an acronym that's about 1.5 feet long, so I don't think I can help you with that. We have 2 animal enclosure modules for a mouse immunology experiment that are going on board. Those are both powered. The glacier is also powered. We have a commercial generic bioprocessing apparatus, which we've flown many times. This time it's carrying the National Lab Pathfinder Vaccine 11 experiment. And so those comprise our 4 powered experiments. We have a colored fungi in space experiment that's from Europe. We have a National Lab Pathfinder Cell 6 experiment. We have the JAXA experiment that I mentioned earlier. We have LMM Bio, which is it's a biological experiment that's going to go up and use the microscope that's in one of our microgravity research racks on orbit to prove that microscope can be used to look at biological samples. And then we have a materials processing experiment called BCAT-6 that's going up that we're installing today. I think that's all of them.
And on the end here, please.
Justin Mullins from New Scientist. At first, Steve, what happens to Discovery after the mission has ended? Is it final resting place being determined?
Not officially. There are a number of organizations bidding for the orbiters, and that there's a panel that's going to determine where they all end up at some point. They're all going to museums where the public can enjoy them as much as we have. But the official who's getting which one is not yet been put out, so I don't know the answer to you.
When will the decision be made?
I'm not sure. We might have to get back to you with an answer on that one.
Okay.
Third row, please.
Question for Steve. Mark Ratterman with Talking Space. On the number 3 engine, the backup controller that you mentioned, the problem powering it up overnight, are those switches, I may have missed this, is this orbiter or ground support equipment?
These are orbiter switches. There is a circuit breaker on the left side panel L4, and there is a switch on the right side panel where the pilot sits, R2, and those are the ones we cycled.
When do they come into play during the countdown, or is that a...
At this point, they're going to stay where they are.
Okay.
Okay, are there any more questions? That will conclude today's STS-133 L-1 countdown status briefing. As Steve mentioned, the rotating service structure will move away from Space Shuttle Discovery in preparation for its launch tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. That will be shown on NASA television. Commentary coverage for the launch tomorrow will begin with tanking at 6:25 a.m. Eastern Time live on NASA TV. For more information on the STS-133 mission and its crew, visit www.nasa.gov/shuttle. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for this STS-133 status briefing. Joining me is Mike Moses, Chair of the Pre-Launch Mission Management Team.
Good evening.
And Mike Leinbach, Shuttle Launch Director.
Good evening.
We'll hear from them and then take questions. Mr. Moses.
Thanks, Kendra. Let's see, we finished up a mission management team meeting. It was actually a pretty quick meeting in that we didn't try to get into all the technical details. The teams have been working all day long. The problem we've had is a main engine controller showed us a funny signature this morning when we powered up and we're doing a standard check. The main engine controllers are basically dedicated computers that sit on the main engine themselves and control the main engine. So the shuttle main computers tell the main engine controller what it needs to do, and then the main engine controller runs all the pieces and parts on the engine. There's 2 per engine, a primary and a backup controller. Obviously, we like to have both of them running from a redundancy standpoint. And what happened is today they were doing some power checks on the redundant system, and when they threw the switch to turn it on, it's powered by 3 phases of AC, so an A, B, and a C phase. And that one of the 3 phases didn't immediately come on, and the controller will not work on 2 phases, so it did not come on. So When they were pulling the data to look at that and try to understand what happened, maybe it was a switch or a circuit problem, about an hour and a half later while they were talking and troubleshooting, they looked and noticed that the controller had suddenly come on and that phase B engaged itself and started working. And that's actually not all that uncommon. These circuit breakers are basically single pole push switches, and they build up a little bit of contamination, a little bit of carbonization, and sometimes you have to scrub them by cycling them back and forth mechanically, moving them around to knock some of that loose. Historically, we've seen that in circuit breakers before, so that alone didn't really cause a whole lot of concern, but we did want to talk about the fact that it kind of healed itself after time. But again, that by itself is not all that big of a deal. So they talked a little bit, and the troubleshooting plan they came up with was to cycle that breaker a little bit to try to make sure we've shaken everything off of it, do some actual power-up sequences of that main engine controller, make sure it was healthy, and let it run its own self-checks to show that it was okay. While they were doing that, they noticed a little blip in all three phases, it's hard to nail it down because there's the circuit that feeds off the voltage is really feeding us a summation of all three phases. So to call it a 5-volt change in the circuit's actually not true. But needless to say, let's keep it in layman's terms. The signature coming out of that circuit showed another little glitch that was a little bit unexpected and we hadn't seen before. The teams struggled with that all day. Struggled's not the right word. They grappled with it all day to try to come up with, is there one cause here? Is there two problems? Is it something we understand? Is it in the controller? Is it in the power feed system? Is it the circuit breaker? Is it the switch? Is it the AC system on the vehicle? And in running through all that, they got to a really good story, and I think if we would have had about a 9-hour MMT, we could have heard all that data, judged it all, and been good to fly. But that's not the right thing to do for this team to try to then come in the morning and tank and launch. So it was a pretty easy decision to say that we're getting really close to having really good understanding of the problem, but we need to polish it, we need to organize it, we need to make sure that we're not wrong about it. And in that, we do two big things. One is we want to, even though we think we understand the problem, spend a whole lot of time talking about what if we're wrong. So what's going to happen if this controller does flake out, either in the count tomorrow or Thursday now, or once we start going uphill after launch. So what are the consequences? What's our tolerance? What margins does the system have if there's a problem? The other big piece of that is to make sure we're not, to put it bluntly, crafting a solution that matches what we think the problem is, and that we're actually having a good physics-based understanding of the phenomenon. Does it make sense that a circuit breaker with a little bit of bad contact could explain both of these signatures we saw? The community feels pretty confident that that is the case, but they do need time to polish that story, bring some historical data to show whether we've had instances like this in the past, what was similar to this scenario, what was different from this scenario, what extrapolations we can make, and really spend the time to draw all the dots on the piece of paper and draw the line that takes us from what we like to say, we don't fly with unknown risk, and right now this risk is a little bit still unknown to us. We're going to take another day to get to know it better, for lack of a better word, and make this a known risk that we do understand and we've quantified. You've seen us do that time and time again. It's one of the fundamental tenets of NASA and the Space Shuttle program, that we make sure we truly understand the risk we do fly with. You don't want to ever go with unknown risk. And so we're going to take an extra day to do that. Like I said, I think we could have gotten there. I think the data is there in the team, but it's really the better part of Valor to let them have the time to go put that story together in a nice, crisp package that we can all walk through tomorrow. So our plan is to let the teams do that. They're going to be working pretty hard overnight and in the morning, and we're going to reconvene tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for another MMT. Typically, when we have MMTs, we like to let the teams go off, get their answers, vet that through all the sub-elements, the safety reviews, the independent reviews, the ground ops team, the orbiter teams, the JSC teams, the KSC teams, and come to the MMT with a nice, here's the answer, this is what you should vote on. Makes my job really easy. Tomorrow we'll do it a little different because we're not going to have that chance. We're going to let the teams come in, present all that data. We're going to sit and talk about it, and then we'll kind of take a break and let those little sub-teams go off and have their meetings and talk, and then we'll come back. You know, I don't know how long of a break I'll take, a half an hour. We've done this before when we face a time-critical problem. It's easier to let the teams all hear the data together and make a decision together rather than trying to kind of one by one step through the process of one team's okay and recommends the next thing. We all kind of need to hear the whole story together. So tomorrow, you guys might be looking for data coming out during the day, but really it's gonna head right into that MMT where we hear the story and then decide whether we're good to go. Mike can talk to you a little bit about what they're doing at the pad to set up for that. The team's brought some options forward to look at, can we just R&R that circuit breaker? Can we R&R the engine controller? And R&R, I mean, remove and replace. The work to do that is pretty invasive, both on the engine and on the controller and on the circuit breakers. We probably could have taken that work, but by doing so, we would have introduced a fair bit of risk into the system by making that change. Anytime you break an electrical connection, we like to do a complete retest of that connector. Some of those circuits we can't retest at the pad. Main landing gear, prox op sensors you can't go test. ET doors we can't go test right now. So there's some things we couldn't retest, and so we'd have to buy some risk. And really, Mike and I talked right up front, and it was not worth even talking about that risk. So we took that right off the plate. And what we're going to do is focus on the rationale to fly in the condition we're in. And if that rationale tomorrow doesn't sound good enough, we'll see what more time we need to make it a story that we are comfortable with. And ultimately, if we find that we cannot get comfortable with the scenario we have, then we'll go down the path of R&R, because that is a little longer-term investment in time and effort, and then the retest that would be needed to do that. And so that was a lot of risk that by taking that off the plate tonight, we let the teams really focus on the problem at hand and not worrying about too many options at once, which is another thing this team is really good at, is building lots and lots of options. But again, the main theme today was to focus and let them narrow down. And like I said, I think they had the answer for me. It's just a better part of value. And to be honest, it lets me have some dinner then later tonight rather than meeting all night long and then having to come right back in at 5 a.m. to help Mike and let him know and get his team ready to tank the vehicle. So this was a pretty easy decision on my point. You know, the problem is pretty simple. It's got a few nuances that we haven't really seen before. We're going to let the team make sure that we're not doing something a little too, like I said, that we're not being too aggressive on our analysis of the problem, and I fully expect tomorrow we'll hear a decent story and be ready to press ahead with a Thursday launch. So I think that's enough for now. I'll let Mike give you his comments.
All right, appreciate it. We'll see from an execution perspective, we are in the T-minus 11-hour hold, and we will remain there for an additional 24 hours. We'll pick up the clock again tomorrow night at 18:30, assuming that we get the go from Mike and the mission management team that we have sufficient flight rationale based on the anomaly we've seen. I'd like to emphasize one point that Mike made. A lot of the decision tonight, in my mind, was based on crew fatigue. If we had pressed on and gotten through all the discussions necessary to get to flight rationale tonight, probably could have gotten there, but it would have taken several hours. And a lot of the people supporting that flight rationale tonight would have also been required on console tomorrow morning for ET load and, of course, for launch itself. And so from a crew perspective, it made sense to take the additional 24 hours also. Let's see, the rest of the countdown then for Thursday. LOX and LH2 loading will begin a little after 6 a.m. on Thursday morning. The crew will board just after noontime. The window opens at 15:24 Eastern, and we would shoot for a preferred launch time of 15:29. The team has executed an extended hold at T-minus 11 hours quite a few times in the past. It's a very easy thing for us to do. The test directors and test conductors are in the firing room right now executing this plan for us. The RSS will remain in place. We won't retract tonight. We'll do that tomorrow night on time, and looking for a launch on Thursday. The weather, we got a little bit of an update from range weather. The percentages haven't changed. It's still 70% no-go for Thursday. Tomorrow will be the transition day with the front coming through. You see some of that, some of the prefrontal cloudiness out there tonight. And then the major concern Thursday is low cloud ceilings and the potential showers within 20 miles of the SLF. So, you know, we are where we are. We're going to take time to understand this problem. We will pick back up with the countdown tomorrow evening and hope for a good on-time launch Thursday morning now. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll now take questions. When the microphone comes your way, please state your name, affiliation, and to whom you're addressing your question. We'll start over in the corner with Mark.
Hi, Mark Kirkman, Interspace News for Mike Moses. I'm really surprised to hear you say that you're leading towards flight rationale. Given the sensitivity of those controllers to current transients, how is it you think you're going to be comfortable with not going in there and even if it is dust or contamination, not going in there and actually cleaning those contacts and making sure that that dust can't get back in there? And another part of the question is, I'm not clear, was the voltage drop, the multi-phase voltage drop, and the single-phase spike, were those two separate events at two separate times in the day, or you're saying they both happened at the same time and you're trying to trace them to a single-point failure?
Let's see, they were two separate events at two separate times in the day. But we think the cause of that was a common cause, and that was a circuit breaker a contamination, and when I say contamination, that's being way over negative on what's going on. We have hundreds of circuit breakers on the ship. And this is the way they work. They're a pressure sensitive. You push it in, you engage the metal contact. It's very temperature sensitive. It's very pressure sensitive in order to detect a current change and then pop open if it's above the limit it's supposed to be. So the scenario being that we have it's that history of circuit breakers that gives us the confidence that if it is a circuit breaker, the fact that we've engaged a solid contact, the controller has now been powered up I think twice, both nominal power up signatures each time. The circuit breaker's been scrubbed, we're probably up to at least a half a dozen times now. Every single time it re-engages. So once that contamination clears, it's a good breaker. And we have, to be honest, quite a bit of data to show that that's the case with these. So it's going to involve a little bit of risk acceptance, but I don't think it's that big of a limb to go out on to accept that risk. One of the things we need to see, and this needs to move from what I know and what elements of the team know to a formal presentation and acceptance by the program of, yep, that is something we understand, and we do know that there is a little bit of unknown there, but we're willing to accept that. We haven't had a chance to do that, which is why, again, we need some more time to make sure that we're not being a little too forward-leaning with that and not just going on, well, we know the circuit breakers act like this, so that has to be the problem. We want to make sure that we're not doing that. So so that's kind of our confidence in the breaker. And the piece that we're really going to give them time is to draw that connection between those two separate events, and how do you show that that's one cause that did that. And again, the engineering teams are pretty confident with that, but they need to spend the time to make sure that they can prove that to us.
Marcia.
Associated Press, probably from Mike Moses. You mentioned, is it an automatic, if you had to go in and replace the circuit breaker or controller, is that an automatic rollback then at that point? And you mentioned wanting to look at all the options of what if you're wrong, what if you are wrong and the circuit breaker doesn't work properly, then what happens?
Sure. So on the repair, the teams have been working in parallel to develop repair plans. We haven't had a chance to look at them and scrub them. I'm not sure rollback is on the table at all. To be honest, we haven't really looked that far down. We're kind of piecing this off in the window we have. We know ends on the 7th. So anything that's a longer term kind of thing, like an engine replacement, is a 2-week endeavor, right? So there's no real need to talk about that one right now because we know that doesn't fit. There are ways to be creative with it, but again, I'm not sure it really buys you much if we're looking at our next launch window opening up December 1st around there. So from that standpoint, we haven't gone very far down the if we are R&Ring, which is why we're kind of going to focus on what do I have in front of me that I can do in this period, and that is understanding the problem I actually have. And again, it's a lot like the leaks we had both in the hydrazine system and in the gaseous helium and nitrogen systems. We do a lot of work to repair it, but unless you know what you're trying to repair in the first place, you might be causing more problems in the first place. So it's not time to repair something because we haven't yet identified exactly what the problem is to know that that's something that is the problem. We could go spend all this time replacing a circuit breaker only to find that maybe we were wrong and that is not the common cause. So before we go kick off all that effort, let's go spend some time, make sure we understand our risks. As to the what if we're wrong and the consequences, we'll hear some details tomorrow, but fundamentally, on the basic level, the engine needs only one controller to run, and it has a backup controller if it needs it. And Mark can chime in if I get this wrong. So basically, if the circuit breaker then fails or introduces, worst case would be a hard failure, but to be honest, the controllers aren't very tolerant of a big voltage change, and they're not resettable. So once they drop off, they're done, and so that controller would power itself down. And now in this case, you're talking about the redundant controller on engine 3, I believe. Don't quote me on that one because I don't remember exactly. Oh, right here, SSME 3, engine 3. So from that standpoint, that's not a big deal. That's just that one failure, and we have the redundancy. If a second failure came in and took out the primary controller on that engine, so now you'd have both controllers lost, that engine would shut down, but it's a graceful shutdown, a contained, that's the way it's supposed to shut down. And so you'd lose an engine if that happened. Now you go to when does it happen, when does the first failure happen, when does the second failure happen, and then the consequence of losing an engine. That by itself is also not necessarily a bad day. We're going to go understand all that rationale and redundancy. That gives us confidence to fly, but again, fundamentally, we don't often use our redundancy as the reason why we can go ahead and fly. We like to understand that we have a good, clean system before we start. But the other piece of this that's going to be good is we have the ability to monitor this right up and through main engine ignition and even SRB ignition to know if the problem does reoccur. If it did reoccur, that would probably give us pause. But again, we need to tie that, and that's one of the forward actions coming out of tonight was if it occurs again, what's that mean? What are you going to do about it? And so the teams are going to build that story for us as well.
Bill.
Bill Hart with CBS for either of you. But just to follow Marcia's question, if it's anything other than develop rationale to fly as is, are we out of here in this current window? In other words, can you replace a circuit breaker or a panel and get that done and still get an opportunity at the end of the window, or is it fly as is or nothing in this window?
Well, see, the teams are developing that plan to change out the circuit breaker. I can tell you it would require powering down the ship before we would go after that circuit breaker and the panel that it's on. Before you power down the ship, you have to get the cryogenics off for the fuel cells, so we'd have to deservice PRSD. Then power down the ship, get into that work, reload PRSD, get back into launch countdown. It'd be very, very tight, I can tell you. The guys are looking at that plan right now. I don't have the answer for it. I can tell you it'd be very tight, though. It'd be a lot of work, and that's what Mike was getting into earlier. Is the value of that worth the risk of doing all that work? You're opening up this panel, you're changing out a circuit breaker, not knowing that the circuit breaker is exactly the problem right now. We may be chasing the wrong thing, and so we really want to understand where the problem is before we press on. L4.
So yeah, left-hand side behind the commander. And just to expand, right, so you guys don't go write the articles that say Shuttle's pressing ahead with schedule pressure because they must fly in this window. That didn't factor at all into my decision. If I'd have had, like Mike said, we talked before the MMT, if I'd have had 2 weeks of launch time, I still would have made this decision tonight because we don't yet understand enough what to do next. And so tonight lets everybody understand it. Tomorrow we see what the action is. If tomorrow we come in and go, we either still don't understand it or we understand it and we need to fix it, then we're going to go do that. We're not going to just go fly as is. But so when I say we're going to go focus on fly as is, that's not to preserve schedule. That's really to understand the problem first. And we kind of talked about this when we were talking about the leaks. Fix the problem and then set the launch date. So we're going to go understand the problem and decide if we have to fix it, and then we'll talk about the launch date.
Irene.
Irene Klotz with Reuters. Two, I guess, launch window questions. Thursday, would the weather be a factor in whether you decide to press ahead, if assuming the flight rationale works out? And did JSC get anywhere with opening up Monday as a launch option?
See, on the opening up Monday, I haven't heard, I haven't talked to them. I know they're working that in the background. Kind of the guideline I gave them was after a couple of scrubs, then they should start turning up the heat. I think we've now passed that criteria, so I suspect tomorrow they'll start turning up the heat and see where that falls. And so I can't answer whether the 8th is good or not. And that's a pretty big, complicated problem. It's not just JSC; it's the Russians and the ISIS program and the partners. So we'll go talk about that at length. But I'm not ready to have that discussion just yet. So I can't answer that one. On the I just drew a blank on your first question, Irene. I'm sorry. Yep, weather skipper. Let's see. Personally, I don't like to do that. I would be very hesitant on a more than 24-hour forecast to go make a decision. We've tanked before with 70% no-go. We've tanked with 80, 90% no-go and had a really good day that day. So we'll play that one by ear. I'll probably take that one down to the wire and we'll go to the tanking meeting and decide if, for the weather that's about to hit us in 12 hours, is it the right thing to do. So no, I'm not going to factor the weather in ahead of time on that one.
Todd.
Todd Halverson in Florida today with two, if I could. The first, I guess, are both for Mike Moses. If this voltage irregularity cropped up during main engine startup after the engine's ignited, would it in and of itself cause an engine shutdown on the pad? Is it within specification? I just don't understand that.
Yeah, the magnitude of the signature we saw would not have caused any problems. It's within tolerance of the system to handle it. We didn't violate any limits. We didn't violate any LCCs, launch commit criteria. We didn't violate any spec on the box. So this is just due diligence of a signature that is somewhat unexplained and somewhat unexpected, but by itself clearly passes the limit. And had this occurred at a period where we couldn't take action to stop and talk about it, like at main engine start, it would have actually not affected the system at all, and we would have lifted off just fine.
And I was curious as to what it is you need to hear as the chairman of the MMT to have the confidence to go ahead and press ahead. What do you need to hear in this story?
Well, I kind of laid that out at the beginning. We basically need to talk about an integrated end-to-end understanding of the problem, and that we haven't drawn the dots to say that this two separate signatures is one problem, and that's actually physically explainable. I think there's a fair bit of historical data that guys can bring to the table to help us show that while maybe not noticed before, this is probably not an uncommon signature. We're literally talking about a 40 ohm change in resistance in the circuit. And if you know your electronics, which I don't, that's nothing. I mean, that's hardly anything. And so the fact that we've never really seen it before maybe is not because we weren't looking at this level of detail before. And so we might be able to pull something out of the hat that just says, hey, this actually is very explainable and it's a known condition and we're good. That would obviously give me great confidence to fly. And so the ability to draw that connection, that we do truly actually physically have an explanation for the problem and that it's not just a convenient explanation, is really what I'm personally looking for tomorrow.
In the back, please.
Mark Ratterman from Talking Space for Mike Moses. Is the problem that you're describing and looking at historical data, is that something that's easy, difficult? Is it something you have tools to do, or does it require recall from individuals on the team?
No, and Mike can talk to the process. It's actually very easy to do. In fact, by the time we hit the MMT, I think they had finished reviewing this flow's worth of data every time that circuit breaker's been cycled, and I think they've been in the one or two flows before that. The main engine guys are already 5 or 6 flights back in history looking at their problems. We call it, it's a PRACA database, which is a problem reporting and accounting, and I don't remember what the last A is.
Corrective action.
Corrective action, thank you. That database is an easily searchable tool. We're able to put in circuit breaker part numbers, main engine controller part numbers, and it'll flag every instance of a problem that affected those, and they can be screened pretty quickly. The teams have done that. Via that, we've learned that on STS-90, and I forget exactly when in the count, but the problem that we saw initially where we throw the switch and one of the phases doesn't come on happened in that flow, and it wasn't in a condition that was known then. And the failure analysis that went along with that, we're able to look at and build on. And then, and I forget which flight it was too, but the potential of this voltage drop-off has happened before. At that time, it was correlated to an actual brush where they bumped the circuit breaker. That circuit breaker being bumped momentarily made it hiccup, which then induced this scenario. So again, we have a very good physics-based understanding that the circuit breaker can cause these problems, but let's make sure we've got all those ducks in a row. So to answer your question of how hard it is, it's actually pretty easy. The hard part is it's a lot of data, and there's a lot to talk about. And that's kind of what I mean. I think the answers were all there today, but we hadn't yet had a time to pull it together and organize it and make sure it does flow end to end.
Greg.
Hi, Greg Dobbs from HDNet Television. Of the several reasons why launch windows sometimes come to an end, what's the reason this time? Why is Sunday the last day until December?
Let's see, this one is a beta cutout, so that's the solar angle that the sun makes on the orbit. When we're docked to the space station, the shuttle itself can't do much to control the temperatures. The sun hits the same part every time, and it overheats a few components on the shuttle. If we were undocked, we'd kind of do a barbecue roll to keep the heat evenly spread, but when we're done stationed, we can't. That limit used to be 60 degrees. I think they've been looking at increasing it to 65, so that's kind of what we're talking about of do we have a little wriggle room to maybe get a couple extra degrees and give us one more launch attempt. But that's really the cutout for this one, is that beta angle.
Mark, you had a follow-up?
Mark Kirkman, Interspace News again. I'm sorry, in your answer to Todd, I got a little confused in how this first presented itself. Were you not able to power DCUB at all initially, and then it magically powered itself up, and then you cycled the breakers?
Yeah, so we pushed, well, all 3 breakers were in, and then the power-up is to turn the switch on a single three-phase switch. And so we threw that switch, and when that happened, the controller did not come up. And the data pulls to understand why that happened revealed that phase B did not, no power went out on phase B. So while the teams were doing that data pull to try to understand why phase B didn't come on, you saw phase A and C pick up a little bit of the extra induced load, understand that we don't have a short circuit, anything going on. While the teams were doing that, it took about an hour and 40 minutes. And when they went back to the troubleshooting plan, which would be to cycle breakers, the controller was on. And it wasn't that it magically came on, but basically the theory is that contamination, basically the spring-assisted circuit breaker pushed through that last little bit of oil or carbon, whatever happened to be on the contact, or that the dielectric just became overcome and a connection was made. And so that's the signature we saw. We then, after that, scrubbed that breaker by pulling it out, pushing it back in, pulling out, pushing it back in 5 times with a mark, measuring the currents, making sure everything looked fine. From that point on, everything looked perfect with that power up. The signatures, the traces, the main engine controllers, diagnostics, everything from there on was fine. So that first initial signature was really just a delayed power up because of a not completely made connection on one of the 3 phases.
Irene.
Thanks. Just out of curiosity, under that scenario, if this transient should happen again, would that fit with this flight rationale you think is going to be pulled together, or would it sort of knock that out of the...
No, it fit very well. Actually, the historical consequences of these type of problems in circuit breakers are that when you scrub them, you eliminate that problem, and it now is a good latched breaker, and that won't happen again. The part that's making us pause and why we didn't just press right ahead and go to fly is that a few hours later we saw that circuit breaker, for lack of a better word, kind of dribble the voltage a little bit. And we don't know exactly why that happened because we haven't ever noticed it before. It might be because we weren't looking before. It might be because we don't quite understand the failure mode, and that's what we need to find out. So the concept of if this was just that breaker, we scrubbed it and it made a good contact, the teams were ready to go, we're good with that problem. We've cleared that, and it's okay to fly. That happens a fair bit on these breakers.
And if you saw that dribble thing again, would that be an issue?
Yeah, so as some of the other questions said, if this reoccurred as is, it doesn't violate any limits, it doesn't hurt the controller would have been just fine. So if it reoccurred at the magnitude we saw it, there'd be no problem whatsoever. We just want to make sure we're not, that if it gets worse, what's going to happen? If it happens at the wrong time, what's going to happen? Is there a way it can manifest itself differently, affect multiple controllers? We're going to answer all those questions before we're ready to fly, and not just go on well, if it repeats itself, it's going to be okay, so that one's okay. We need to know why it happened and what happens if it gets worse.
Bill?
I assume the commander listened into the MMT. Did he have any comments on any of this and where you guys are going?
Let's see. Typically, the crew's not actually part of the MMT. We do have a flight crew rep on the team, and so he was definitely there and involved. Again, today's MMT wasn't a question and answer session. It was more of a lay out the problem, recognizing that we're not ready to present, and giving the teams the action to go back and gather that data. But they have been following all day long and plan on following overnight. So, as far as Commander Lindsay and what his personal level of knowledge is, I don't yet know, but we will be tagging up with him later.
Just another one for Mike Leinbach. Obviously, this is the last flow for Discovery. You guys, it's turned into a little bit of a drama, I guess, with the valve issues you guys have had and the troubleshooting. Any disappointment on the team, or is it just another day in the firing room?
It's another day in paradise. I mean, this is part of the business. You fly when you're ready, and you don't if you're not. And we're not ready to go now. Discovery's not going out easy. She's giving us a little bit of trouble, but that's fine. She'll fly perfectly when she does.
And this is the way it lines up, right? Every step of the way through the countdown, and it's built the way it is for just that purpose. You do a lot of checks ahead of time before you get to the pad. When you get to the pad, you check it out. But ultimately, it's all leading towards all those parts and all those pieces and all those electronics all come on at the very end. And so as we get closer and closer to launch, we're testing more and more of those systems and revealing sometimes hiccups in those systems. So we still have a long way to go for launch. I got that whole big tanking thing to do.
Are there any further questions? Well, that will conclude our STS-133 status briefing for tonight. Updates to the briefing schedules and countdown will be on our webpage at www.nasa.gov/shuttle as they become available. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for joining us here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida for this STS-133 status briefing following the Mission Management Team meeting today. I'd like to introduce our panelists, Mike Moses, Chair of the Pre-Launch Mission Management Team.
Good evening.
And Mike Leinbach, Shuttle Launch Director.
Good evening.
I'd like to take just a few minutes to have our briefers speak. We're going to keep this briefing very short so that they can go home and get some sleep before tomorrow morning. Mr. Moses.
Thanks, Kendra. Well, we had our MMT today. We talked for a while, as we knew we would. It was basically the culmination of the teams working for the last 24 hours to pull together the story that we have with regards to this power anomaly we saw on the main engine controller. And again, just as a refresher, when we powered it up during a test now yesterday morning, we saw an anomaly in the signature that was unusual. Basically, one of the phases of AC power, there's 3 phases on a alternating current circuit. One of those 3 did not engage, and the controller therefore did not power up. About an hour and a half, it kind of healed itself and started working. And then about another 2 hours after that, we saw a little voltage drop that didn't trip anything off, but was at the time an unexplained voltage drop. And that gave us pause. So we talked overnight, and the teams brought us a very good story today, a very nice cohesive flow through the data. We reviewed the history, the timeline of the events, other signatures that have occurred similar to this in the past. We talked a lot about our history and our knowledge of the circuit breakers, the components in the system, the switches, the wiring. We talked a lot about the main engine controllers themselves, their tolerance, their redundancy, and then ultimately went to a risk presentation of what do we know about the problem, what don't we know, and is that an acceptable condition to proceed with. At the end of the day, I'll kind of cut to the chase and say we wrapped up with a unanimous poll out of the MMT, no dissenting opinions, no requests for more data. Everybody was very comfortable with the story that came together today. And again, really the rationale there is that all evidence points to this being a circuit breaker problem, so a power supply feed problem. It's not a controller problem, so it's not a main engine controller. So no worries there that the main engine controller itself is going to have problems later on. From a power feed standpoint, really what we saw, and I'll kind of simplify it, but basically these circuit breakers are used in the orbiter. We use them as switches sometimes. You know, in your home, you don't use the circuit breaker as the switch to turn the lights on and off. You have a switch to do that. As a design and a weight savings feature, in some circuits, the circuit breaker is used as that switch. Sometimes it's because there's ways to send multiple power feeds to a given piece of equipment, and you don't want a switch to have all that power sitting right next to it. You use a circuit breaker to do that. Sometimes it's just more convenient and easier to save wiring to do that. So in many instances, and this is one of those instances, that circuit breaker is used as a switch. Now there's also a switch used to turn it on and off. So these circuit breakers aren't cycled with power going to that circuit breaker, so they're not cycled hot. But what we've seen historically in the history of the program is these circuit breakers sometimes don't engage. When you push them in, you don't quite make that contact, and you don't quite get the connection. And we have a pre-approved contingency procedure, which we call basically scrubbing the breaker, and you pull it in and out 5 times, cycling it, and then you push it back in, you turn the power back on, and you see what you got. And in almost every single instance, that results in a good connection. And in fact, in every instance where we see a good connection, a good power feed connection, that connection then stays and lasts and does not give us any more troubles. We went through a lot of failure history. There were instances where we've had circuit breakers fail to engage. We scrubbed them, pushed them back in. They've engaged. We leave that circuit breaker in the ship. We don't take it out, and they've flown for 20 years with no reoccurrence of that problem that made it not quite engage the first time. And really what we went through is a lot of details. The act of using the circuit breaker as a switch can cause a little bit of buildup as there's some arcing and some current coming back and forth, and you get a little pitting, you get an uneven contact surface. The phenolic in there tends to get a little hot and melt, and you get a little non-metallic, non-conducting residue that builds up on these connectors. And by pushing them in and out, scrubbing them back and forth, you can knock that off. So what we think happened in this instance was that's the scenario we had. We had a little bit of residue built up on this circuit breaker. When we first pushed it in, it did not connect. And because of the sensitivity to the main engine controller, rather than immediately scrubbing that breaker, we sat and talked about it. While we were talking about it, the dielectric, basically the circuit breaker itself, the current, overcame the little bit of resistance that it was facing and the impedance that it was generating, and it made the connection and therefore sent power downstream to the controller, which powered itself up, and that resulted in the kind of the unexpected self-powering of the controller that we saw yesterday morning. Now I say unexpected, that's really very well explained now that we understand what was going on. So it's not that something unknown was happening. The act of scrubbing it, we then went and scrubbed it, and when we put it back in, we looked at the high-speed data and found that second power-up after we did that first set of troubleshooting where we scrubbed the breaker showed a little bit slow response in the power-up as well. Not nearly enough to cause a problem, but it wasn't quite perfect. So further proof that we probably knocked some of that contamination off, but we didn't quite get it all. A little after that, we had this unexpected voltage drop. Again, very indicative of the fact that there's a little bit of resistance in there. We went through the data. I think I mentioned yesterday that about a 40 ohm resistance in this circuit in test, the theory, actually, the model shows that it only takes a 9 ohm resistance to cause the voltage drop we saw. So it just takes a minor little bit of contamination there to cause this signature. The other piece of data we found is this voltage drop is not as uncommon as we thought it was. It actually occurs not often, but a fair bit as the controller responds to the power on the input side. A fan kicking on, the controller itself drawing a little more current causes this voltage to kind of fluctuate just a little bit. The one we saw was a little higher magnitude than we've seen in the past, maybe a little longer duration, but it was still not the only time we've ever seen it, which is where we were yesterday. We thought this might have been an only time occurrence. So another big piece of data that got us comfortable today was the fact that it's not all that uncommon. And so again, when we laid it all out, it all racked up to be pretty clear that that our most probable cause here is that we had contamination on that circuit breaker that we've slowly cleared off by scrubbing it. In fact, after we left last night, after we left the press conference last night, we scrubbed it 5 more times. Those power-up signatures were perfect, just like they've been in the past. So pretty good proof that we've knocked the contamination off. Our history shows us that once we do that, that is a solid connection and it's not going to change. And therefore, we had pretty good acceptance rationale today to go fly. And so, again, we kind of went through all the ins and outs. We talked about what if we're wrong. We talked about all the things that could be bad. And at the end of the day, while we don't completely understand the failure because we don't have it sitting in front of us as a failed component, everybody was comfortable with the residual risk left, that it was an acceptable one to take. And we do understand that anomaly that we had. And again, we're good to fly. So that takes us to the schedule, and just try to cut off some of the questions. Right, the weather still looks really bad for tomorrow, but we're going to go ahead and go down to the tanking telecon in the morning. Basically, at 5:30 in the morning, the team's going to get together and we'll talk about what the latest forecast is. We'll see what that is. You know, if the forecast tomorrow morning is still as bad as it is today, there's a chance we might decide not to spend one of our opportunities tomorrow. But it's not. It's too early to make that call right now. We need to see what the forecast is. 12 hours out, it's a whole lot better forecast 12 hours out than it is 24 out, especially when that front's not quite moving as much as we maybe thought it was. That might be a good thing, it might be a bad thing, but we'll know better in the morning what that really means to us. So gave Mike and his team the challenge to go have us ready to go, and with the caveat still that, as always, the weather might make us make a different course of action. But from the vehicle perspective and the mission management team, we're ready to go, and at this point kind of turn the reins over here to the launch team and execute launch for Discovery.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. We'll see the team in the firing room is doing really well. The additional hole we added to the countdown presents no problem to us at all. We recycled some mid-deck experiments to refresh them, so essentially when we get into countdown tomorrow, we'll be in a first launch countdown posture. We wanted to rotate the rotating service structure to the park position tonight at about 6:30, and we got held up because of phase 1 lightning concern in the area. So we're on hold for the RSS. Right now, that's not a big concern for us. Talking to the range weather before I came into this briefing, Kathy Winters expects that to last an hour, maybe an hour and a half or so, and we should be able to get the RSS retracted in about an hour, and that's no issue for us. The rest of the countdown is very, very nominal for us. We're looking for the opening of the launch window at 15:24 tomorrow afternoon, Eastern Time. Team's in great shape, ready to execute. I just might add to the mission management team discussion, you know, from my perspective, it sounded very, very good. The flight rationale is solid. Scrubbing off circuit breakers is something we do, very, very standard process here at KFC. We have a procedure to do that. So it really, truly sounds like we've got the culprit and we've cleaned it off and we should be good to go. So team's ready to execute, and we'll come in the morning and see if the weather permits a tanking and a launch attempt tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you. We have time for just a few questions. When the microphone comes your way, state your name, affiliation, to whom you're addressing your question. We'll start over here with Bill.
Bill Harwood, CBS News for either one of you. You guys were talking yesterday about not overstressing the launch team, and I'm just curious, with the forecast being what it is and the fact that these guys have been working pretty hard over the last day to generate all this data, give you guys this presentation, and then go home and come back in a couple of hours to tank with a pretty bad outlook. Why not wave off a day right now?
Well, we talked to the team that put together all the charts today, and really the team that's going to come in tomorrow morning and fuel the vehicles is a different team. Now there are some people that were at the presentation all day long today and have to cycle back in tomorrow morning, but it's just a handful of folks, and so that's not an issue. We also asked if the team would be prepared for 3 in a row, if that should become necessary, if we don't tank tomorrow for whatever reason, and wave that off, would we be able to go 3 in a row? And given the 1 day additional time in the countdown, people cycled back. We were essentially in a babysitting mode in the firing room, so everybody got a good day off. We made sure that everybody is working to our work rules that we have in place. So right now I don't see an issue with tomorrow, certainly, and even if we get into a 3-in-a-row scenario, we always ask the team before that third attempt if they're ready to go, and we would do that again, of course, but the pre-planning for that says we should be fine.
James Dean from Florida Today. So is 3 in a row what you expect you would attempt, well, depending on what happens tomorrow?
It depends, right?
It's early to say that.
What is your latest on your last possible launch option and
yeah, we're talking about the window and extending the window out. I mentioned that a couple times. Right now, it looks like there's potential there to make that happen, but some of the hurdles are pretty big, and so right now the posture is that we're not going to pursue that. And again, I say that, and then we always have the caveat that we might find a way to make it work. But right now, it looks like the 7th is still our last launch attempt.
Marcia?
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press, and my questions have been asked, but I'll come up with something here. We've been reminiscing for the last week about Discovery's last launch. Mike, yesterday you said that, she doesn't want to go out quietly or easily. Any mention of that today, or any new reflection on any of that?
No, there was no talk in the briefing today about Discovery's last flight. It was all about the anomaly and do we understand it, and are we safe to fly? And the answer to that is yes. So no, there was no reflection today in the meeting at all.
Greg Dobbs with HDNet Television. Can you give us a picture, if you can give us a picture of the scrubbing? What does this actually mean? I mean, I'm picturing a switch going in and out, and the residue gets pushed off by the female in the male-female relationship.
It's actually it's a metal-to-metal contact. So there's the passive part of the circuit breaker is 2 flat metal plates, and then the active part, the plunger that moves in and out, has 2 concave mating surfaces on it. So you're literally pushing those 2 metal contacts together and then pulling them back apart. So the act of pushing them in and the mechanical force of doing that knocks any debris that's built up on that metallic contact off.
That was the fix.
Yes. Yes.
Mark.
Hi, Mark Kirkman, Interspace News. Some of us were out of the pad, so we missed part of your briefing. If you covered it, or if not, could you explain what you'll do if I know you don't expect to see a reoccurrence, but if you do see the same transit, even though it's within limits, what's the plan during the count if you see that again?
Yeah, we talked about that. No, we didn't. So yeah, we talked that a little bit. The team has talked that. We didn't bring it up at the MMT too much, but basically the plan would be we'd talk about it. The thing that we discussed today that was kind of the new data we didn't have from yesterday is that these momentary voltage dips of a couple volts on this composite voltage at the controller itself are not as uncommon as we thought they were, and that they're actually not regular, but they can be tied to an event in the AC feed upstream, or they can be tied to a controller issue itself. So from that standpoint, seeing another little anomaly of a current or a voltage drop-off might not be a reason to pause. We are most certainly going to talk about it and make sure we understand it, that it doesn't violate any of the understanding we have as we go into this anomaly, and that nothing in those conditions have changed. But it's not an automatic punt and run with your hair on fire. We're going to talk through it just like we would any other problem. So we did get a little further today to understand, again, the concept of what the signature likely is. Now, if we saw something that showed us that this contact is degrading and that the connection that the circuit breaker is making is now becoming no longer a valid, solid connection, that would violate what we kind of used as our rationale today, and we would most certainly stop and talk about that.
That's all the time we have for the STS-133 status briefing. Launch coverage will begin tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Time, live on NASA television with the beginning of tanking. For more information on the STS-133 mission and crew, please visit www.nasa.gov/shuttle. Thank you.